When a brand new CEO fires her best cybersecurity engineer in 10 seconds flat, she thinks she's cleaning house. What she doesn't know: he's the only person standing between her billion-dollar company and total collapse. Within hours, everything she inherited will be burning, millions frozen, thousands of families stranded, and the man she humiliated might be the only one who can save them all. Stay with me until the end to see how this unfolds. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The overhead fluorescents in the operations center hummed like dying insects. Mason Reed pressed his palms against his eye sockets hard enough to see stars, trying to force his brain to function for just a few more hours. The coffee had stopped working somewhere around 3 a.m. The energy drinks did nothing but make his hands shake. He was running on pure stubbornness now, and the knowledge that if he left his station, people would get hurt, real people. Families, workers waiting on direct deposits to make rent. The attack signature on his secondary monitor pulsed like a heartbeat. Red. Waiting. Patient. "Still here, you bastard," Mason muttered, typing another containment command. His daughter Sophie's photo sat next to his keyboard, slightly crooked in its plastic frame. 8 years old, gap-toothed smile, wearing the Wonder Woman costume he'd bought her for her birthday. The birthday he'd missed because of another security crisis. He'd promised her pancakes this morning. He glanced at the clock. 7:38 a.m. Monday. Sophie would already be at school. Mrs. Chen from 4B had picked her up again, third time this month. He'd have to bake those cookies she liked, bring them by as a thank you, if he ever left this chair. The malicious code hiding in the payment infrastructure was sophisticated, elegant even. Someone with deep access had planted it, someone who understood the system architecture better than most of his own team. It was designed to look like normal traffic until triggered by a specific event. A system restart. Mason had spent 47 hours tracking it down, isolating it, building containment protocols that kept it dormant without alerting whoever had planted it. He couldn't remove it yet. Couldn't even tell anyone about it. Not until he understood the full scope. Not until he knew who to trust. His head dropped forward. Just for a second, just to rest his eyes. The sound of heels clicking on tile snapped him awake. Multiple pairs. Getting closer. Mason straightened, blinking hard, trying to bring the screens back into focus. The attack signature was still there, still contained, still waiting. Jesus Christ, is he asleep? The voice cut through the operations center like a whip. Cold, precise, absolutely certain of itself. Mason turned. The woman striding toward him couldn't have been more than 30, but she moved like someone who'd been giving orders her entire life. Dark suit, hair pulled back so tight it probably hurt, eyes that cataloged everything and forgave nothing. Behind her, the entire morning shift of the operations team had suddenly found reasons to be very interested in their own workstations. "You," she pointed at Mason. "What's your name?" Mason stood, stumbling slightly. His left leg had gone numb from sitting too long. "Mason Reed, Infrastructure Security. Ma'am, I need to brief you on, you need to be awake during operating hours." She looked at his desk, the coffee cups, the energy drink cans, the crumpled food wrappers. Her lip curled slightly. "How long have you been here?" "There's a situation. I asked you a question." Her voice didn't rise, didn't need to. "How long have you been at this desk?" Mason felt the room watching him. 47 hours sounded insane when you said it out loud. "I've been monitoring a security threat that..." "Security threat." She repeated the words like they tasted bad. "And you're handling it by falling asleep at your station?" "Ma'am, if you'll let me explain..." "Explain what? That you think the rules don't apply to you?" She stepped closer. Mason could smell her perfume, something expensive, something that probably cost more than his rent. "Do you know who I am?" Mason glanced at the operations team. A few of them looked away quickly. "No, ma'am. Evelyn Carter. I'm the new CEO as of this morning, and in my first hour, I find one of my senior engineers passed out at his desk surrounded by garbage." She gestured at his workspace like it was a crime scene. "Is this what leadership looks like at this company? Is this the standard?" Mason's exhaustion crystallized into something sharp. The standard is keeping the payment network online. The standard is making sure 4 million customers wake up with their money where it's supposed to be. That's what I've been doing. By sleeping? By working. Mason heard his voice rising and didn't care anymore. Ma'am, I understand this looks bad, but there's something you need to know about the system. What I need to know is whether my employees are competent. Evelyn turned to address the entire room. Everyone was watching now, not even pretending to work. Let me be clear about my expectations. I'm here to fix this company. My grandfather built something important, and I won't let it fail because people have become lazy, complacent. She turned back to Mason. You're fired, effective immediately. The operations center went silent. Even the hum of the servers seemed to pause. Mason felt the words hit him like a physical thing. You can't. I absolutely can. Evelyn held out her hand. Badge. Now. There's a security threat, which you've clearly been handling so well by napping through it. Her hand didn't waver. Badge. Mason looked around the room. 40 people he'd worked with for 6 years. Not one of them would meet his eyes. He understood. New CEO, first day, making an example. Nobody wanted to be next. His fingers found the badge clipped to his belt. The photo on it was from his first week. Younger, more hair. Sarah had still been alive then, had straightened his collar before he left for the ID photo, kissed him for luck. Listen to me. Mason kept his voice level. Do not restart the payment system. I know there's a scheduled maintenance window today at noon, but do not restart anything until... You don't work here anymore. Evelyn took the badge from his hand. You don't get to give instructions. People will get hurt. People get hurt when employees sleep on the job. She dropped his badge into her jacket pocket. Security will escort you out. 2 guards appeared from somewhere. Mason hadn't even seen them approach. They stood on either side of him, not touching, just there. Present, waiting. Mason grabbed his phone, his keys. Looked at Sophie's picture one more time. He'd been trying to protect this company, these people, the families depending on those paychecks clearing on time, and he'd just been fired for it. 3 minutes to clear your desk, one of the guards said. Not unkindly, just doing his job. Mason didn't have anything personal here except the photo. He picked it up, slid it into his shirt pocket, felt the plastic frame press against his chest. Ma'am. He turned back to Evelyn one last time. Please, I'm begging you, do not restart the system. Evelyn was already walking away, heels clicking. She didn't turn around. Someone get this area cleaned up. I want it sanitized by lunch. The guards moved closer. Mason let them guide him toward the exit. The walk through the operations center felt like a funeral march. People he'd trained, people he'd covered shifts for when their kids were sick, people he'd helped debug critical issues at 2 a.m. on Christmas Eve. Not one of them said goodbye. The morning sun hit him like a hammer when he stepped outside. He'd been in that artificially lit bunker so long, he'd forgotten what daylight felt like. His car was somewhere in the parking garage. He didn't remember where. Didn't remember driving here on Saturday morning. Saturday, 2 days ago, when he'd first detected the anomaly. Mason's phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Chen. Sophie eating breakfast here. Says you promised pancakes? He typed back with shaking hands. Home soon. Thank you. Really? His car was on level 3. Someone had left a shopping cart against the driver's side door. Mason moved it, climbed in, sat in silence. The air inside was stale and hot. He should start the engine, turn on the AC, drive home to his daughter. Instead, he opened his laptop. The attack signature was still there, still visible through his personal monitoring setup. The connection was against company policy, technically illegal access now that he'd been fired. He didn't care. The malicious code sat in the payment infrastructure like a landmine, waiting for someone to step on it, waiting for that system restart. Mason pulled up the maintenance schedule. The restart was approved for 12:45 p.m. Standard procedure. Happened every Monday. The system would go down for 15 minutes, reboot with fresh memory allocation, come back up clean and optimized. Except this time, it wouldn't come back up at all. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Mr. Reed? A woman's voice. Professional. This is Jennifer from HR. I need to schedule an exit interview and discuss your final paycheck. Are you available this afternoon? No. I'm sorry? I'm not available. I'm busy. Mason hung up. The HR call meant it was real, official. He'd actually been fired. After 6 years of 60-hour weeks and missed birthdays and dinners, eaten cold at his desk, he'd been dismissed in front of everyone like he was nothing. Like the work didn't matter. Like the people he'd protected didn't matter. Mason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Fine. They wanted to do this without him. They could live with the consequences. He started the car and drove home. Pasek. The apartment was exactly how he'd left it Saturday morning. Sophie's cereal bowl still in the sink, her backpack by the door, forgotten because she'd slept at Mrs. Chen's while he worked. The living room curtains drawn because he hadn't been home to open them. Mason dropped his keys on the counter and stood in the silence. He should sleep, shower, eat something, call the school and apologize for another missed morning, do all the normal things normal fathers did on normal Mondays. Instead, he opened his laptop at the kitchen table and logged back into the monitoring system. The attack signature pulsed. Red, patient, hungry. 12:45 p.m. 3.5 hours away. Mason pulled up the source code, started documenting everything he'd found. If they wouldn't listen to him in person, maybe they'd listen to a detailed technical report. He had screenshots, logs, trace data, proof that someone inside the company had compromised the system. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Document everything, timestamps, access patterns, the specific modules that had been modified, the way the malicious code would trigger on restart and propagate through the entire payment network within seconds, how it would freeze transactions mid-process, how millions of dollars would get stuck in digital limbo, how payroll deposits would fail, how mortgage payments would bounce, how thousands of families would wake up Tuesday morning wondering why their accounts were empty, and how, if the attack succeeded fully, the company's reputation would be destroyed, stock price would crater, lawsuits would bury them, everything Evelyn's grandfather had built would collapse. Mason finished the report at 9:47 a.m., 23 pages. Technical but clear, undeniable. He attached it to an email addressed to Evelyn Carter's company account. Subject line: Critical security threat. Do not restart systems. His finger hovered over the send button. She'd fired him, humiliated him, refused to listen to a single word he said. Why should he help her now? Sophie's face appeared in his mind. 8 years old, trusting, waiting for those pancakes he'd promised. But not just Sophie. All the other Sophies. All the other kids whose parents worked for companies that depended on those payment systems. All the families who needed their money to arrive on time. Mason hit send. Then he sat back and waited. Depuis tocad. At 11:30 a.m., Mason's personal phone rang. Unknown number again. He let it go to voicemail. At 11:47 a.m., someone tried to remotely disable his monitoring access. Mason had anticipated that, had built-in redundant connections. They killed 2 of them before he rerouted through a third. At 12:15 p.m., his laptop showed the maintenance team beginning pre-restart protocols. They were really going to do it. Mason stood up, paced the kitchen. He could call the main line, demand to speak to someone, tell them he had proof, evidence, documentation. They'd hang up on him. The crazy fired employee ranting about conspiracies. 12:30 p.m. 15 minutes. His email sat in Evelyn's inbox unopened. The raid receipt never triggered. She wasn't even checking. Mason grabbed his phone, pulled up the company directory he technically shouldn't have access to anymore, found the number for Operations Center direct line. It rang 4 times. Operations, this is Derek. Derek, it's Mason. Listen to me very carefully. Mason? Dude, you can't call here. They said if you tried to contact anyone, I don't care what they said. The system restart at 12:45 is going to trigger a catastrophic failure. There's malicious code in the payment infrastructure. You need to abort the maintenance window. Silence. Derek? Mason, I can't. The new CEO personally approved it this morning. She's watching the whole thing from the executive observation deck. Then get me to her. Let me explain. Oh, but the soul. You're fired, man. Security has orders to arrest you if you come back on property. Derek's voice dropped to a whisper. Look, I'm sorry about what happened, but there's nothing I can do. The line went dead. Mason checked the time, 12:41 p.m., 4 minutes. He pulled up the monitoring dashboard. The maintenance team had already isolated the payment network. The restart sequence would begin automatically at 12:45 exactly. There was nothing he could do from here. No way to stop it. No way to prevent what was about to happen. Mason opened a new document and started recording everything in real time. At least when this all fell apart, there'd be a record. Proof that he'd tried to warn them. 12:44 p.m. The operations center would be full of engineers right now, monitoring dashboards, waiting for the routine restart to complete. Evelyn Carter would be up in the observation deck, probably congratulating herself on her first day of decisive leadership. None of them knew what was coming. 12:45 p.m. On Mason's screen, the restart sequence initiated. Clean shutdown of the payment processing modules. Memory flush. System prep for reboot. Everything looked normal. Looked exactly like it was supposed to. 12:46 p.m. The system began coming back online. Modules loading one by one. Payment infrastructure initializing. Still normal, still fine. 12:47 p.m. The malicious code activated. Mason watched it spread like cancer through the system. The code he'd spent 2 days isolating and containing was now free, now executing exactly as designed. It moved faster than he'd calculated, smarter than he'd anticipated. Transaction processing failed. Transfer protocols failed. Verification systems failed. One by one, every critical component of the payment network turned red on his dashboard. 12:48 p.m. The first alerts would be hitting the operations center now. Engineers scrambling to understand what was happening, why the system wasn't stabilizing, why transactions were freezing mid-process. 12:50 p.m. Mason's phone exploded with notifications. Emergency alerts from monitoring systems he'd set up months ago, the ones nobody remembered existed, the ones still tied to his personal device. Critical failure. Payment network. Offline transactions frozen. 4.7 million. Affected. Estimated financial impact. $847 million system restoration. Unknown. He should feel vindicated. He'd warned them, told them exactly what would happen, and they'd ignored him. But all he felt was sick, because somewhere in those 4.7 million affected transactions were people like him. Single parents, hourly workers, families living paycheck to paycheck who needed that money to arrive on time. And he was sitting in his kitchen, unemployed and powerless, watching them all get hurt. Mason's laptop chimed. Incoming connection request from the company network. Someone trying to reach him remotely. He accepted. Derek's face appeared on screen, pale and sweating. Behind him, Mason could see the operations center in chaos. Red alerts on every monitor. Engineers shouting over each other. Someone was crying. Mason! Derek's voice shook. We need you back here, right now. I'm fired, remember? The CEO is asking for you personally. She can ask all she wants. Mason, please. Derek turned the camera. The observation deck was visible through the glass windows. Evelyn Carter stood frozen, staring at the screens showing the catastrophic failure. Even from here, Mason could see the shock on her face. Everything's falling apart. We can't stop it. You're the only one who understands what's happening. I sent her a report, 23 pages. She didn't even open it. She's opening it now. Derek turned the camera back to himself. She knows she messed up. She knows. Just, please, help us. Mason looked at the chaos on screen, at Derek's desperate face, at the financial devastation spreading through the system in real time, at the innocent people getting hurt. I don't work there anymore, he said quietly. Then he closed the laptop and went to make his daughter pancakes. Came back. Sophie came home at 3:45 p.m., deposited by Mrs. Chen's cheerful wave from the doorway. She dropped her backpack with a thud and threw herself at Mason's legs. You're here! You're actually here! Mason scooped her up even though she was getting too big for it, too old for it. She smelled like school cafeteria pizza and strawberry shampoo. I'm here, and I made pancakes. For dinner? Pancakes work for dinner. Sophie pulled back to look at his face. You look tired. I am tired. Did you save the world again? Mason carried her to the kitchen table where the pancakes sat cooling. He'd made them shaped like animals, or what he thought were animals. Sophie claimed the lumpy one was a dinosaur. Not this time, kiddo. How come? Sometimes people don't want to be saved. Sophie considered this while drowning her pancakes in syrup. That's dumb. Yeah. Mason sat across from her. Yeah, it is. His phone had been ringing nonstop since 1 p.m. Unknown numbers, company numbers, numbers he recognized as board members and executives. He'd silenced it after the first dozen calls. At 4:15 p.m., someone knocked on the apartment door. Mason looked through the peephole. Evelyn Carter stood in the hallway, still in her expensive suit, looking significantly less composed than she had that morning. No security guards this time, just her, alone, holding a tablet. He opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Mr. Reed." Her voice was different now, smaller. "I need to speak with you." "You fired me." "I made a mistake." "You made several mistakes." Mason kept his body blocking the doorway. "You're standing in one of the biggest ones right now." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I read your report, all 23 pages. You were right about everything." "I know. The payment network is completely destroyed. We've frozen nearly $900 million in transactions. Thousands of families won't get their paychecks tonight. Mortgage payments are failing. The board is threatening to remove me. The stock price has dropped 42%. She met his eyes. "And you knew. You tried to warn me, and I wouldn't listen." "No, you wouldn't." "Daddy?" Sophie appeared behind him, syrup on her chin. "Who's that?" Evelyn's gaze shifted past Mason to the little girl, then around him to the small apartment beyond. The tiny kitchen, the stack of bills on the counter, the drawing Sophie had taped to the wall, a stick figure man and a smaller stick figure girl holding hands under a crooked sun. Something in Evelyn's expression cracked. "I didn't know," she said quietly, "about your daughter, about why you were so exhausted." "You didn't ask." "No." Evelyn's hands tightened on the tablet. "I didn't. I just assumed that I was lazy, incompetent, part of the problem." Mason felt Sophie's small hand slip into his. "You saw what you expected to see." Evelyn looked at Sophie again. "How old are you?" 8. Sophie pressed against Mason's side. "Are you Dad's boss?" "Not anymore," Mason said. "Actually," Evelyn's voice was steady now, professional. "I'd like him to come back. If he's willing." Sophie tugged Mason's hand. "You should go, Daddy. People need you." "Sophie." I heard the phone ringing, lots of times. Sophie looked up at him with those too wise 8-year-old eyes. People only call that much when it's important. Mason looked at Evelyn, at the expensive suit and the tablet and the desperation barely hidden beneath the professional mask. Then he looked down at his daughter, at her syrup-sticky face and her absolute faith that her father could fix anything. "Give me 10 minutes, he told Evelyn. The operations center looked like a war zone. Papers everywhere, coffee spilled on desks, half the engineering team shouting into phones while the other half stared helplessly at error logs scrolling too fast to read. Mason walked in and the room went silent. Derek saw him first. Thank Christ. Evelyn followed Mason to his old desk. Someone had already cleaned it, his coffee cups gone, his space sanitized just like she'd ordered. He sat down anyway, woke up the terminal, logged in with credentials that miraculously still worked. The damage was worse than his remote monitoring had shown. "Talk to me," Mason said to the room. "What have you tried?" "Everything." Derek dropped into the chair next to him. Rollback failed. Backup restoration failed. Manual override failed. The malicious code is everywhere. Mason pulled up the system architecture. The attack had propagated exactly as designed, but there was something else now, something new. The code was evolving, adapting to their countermeasures. "Whoever wrote this is watching," Mason said. "They're updating it in real time." "How is that possible?" Evelyn stood behind him, looking at the screens. "Because they're here, inside the company." Mason started typing, tracking the access patterns. "They have administrative privileges, senior-level access." "Who?" Mason's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Give me 5 minutes." The room watched him work. No one spoke. Even the phones stopped ringing, or maybe people just stopped answering them. Mason built a trace program, set it running, and waited. 3 minutes later, he had a name. Victor Hale. Evelyn leaned closer. What? Your vice president of operations. Mason pulled up the access logs. He planted the code 3 weeks ago. He's been maintaining it, updating it, and he's accessed the system 17 times since the restart, modifying the attack pattern to counter everything we've tried. That's impossible. Victor's been with the company for 15 years. He worked directly under my grandfather. He's been working against you since the day you were named CEO. Mason showed her the timestamps. Look, every modification happened within minutes of our countermeasures. He's watching everything we do and adapting. Evelyn stared at the screen. Mason watched emotions cross her face. Disbelief, anger, betrayal. Then something harder, colder. Can you stop it? She asked. If he's still actively controlling the attack? No. Every time I build a solution, he'll just change the parameters. Mason leaned back. But if we cut off his access, I'll handle that. Evelyn pulled out her phone. How long do you need? Mason looked at the destroyed payment infrastructure, at the frozen transactions, at the millions of dollars trapped in digital limbo. 4 hours. Maybe 6. If I can work without interruption. You'll have it. Evelyn was already typing. Derek, clear the operations center. Everyone out except Mason and essential support staff. No one in or out without my direct authorization. What about Victor? I'll deal with Victor personally. She looked at Mason. Fix this. Whatever you need, you have it. Mason nodded and turned back to his screens. Behind him, he heard Evelyn's heels clicking away, heard Derek start clearing the room, heard the chaos dim to something manageable. And then he went to work. The code was beautiful in a terrible way, elegant, sophisticated, written by someone who understood the payment infrastructure at a fundamental level, someone who'd helped build it. Mason had to respect that, even as he tore it apart. He worked in layers, isolating infected modules one at a time. The malicious code fought back, literally. Adaptive algorithms that tried to predict his moves, redundant triggers that activated when he neutralized the primary ones. Fail-safes built on top of fail-safes. Victor had spent weeks on this, maybe months, planning every detail, every contingency. But Victor had one weakness. He was arrogant. The code was too complex, too clever. Victor had built in so many layers of protection that the whole thing had become fragile. One wrong move would collapse it, but one right move would too. Mason just had to find the right move. 2 hours in, Derek brought him coffee. Real coffee, not the break room sludge. How's it looking? Like someone tried to build a house of cards in a hurricane. Mason didn't look away from the screen. But I'm getting there. At hour 3, Evelyn returned. Her suit jacket was gone, hair slightly disheveled. She looked like she'd been through something difficult. Victor's in custody, she said. Security has him in a conference room. He's not talking, but we pulled his access credentials. Good. Mason highlighted a section of code. Watch this. He executed the command. On screen, a cluster of infected modules suddenly went dormant. You got it? Not yet. That was just one layer. Mason was already moving to the next section. But without Victor actively defending it, I can work faster. Evelyn pulled up a chair. What can I do? Tell me about your grandfather. She blinked. What? You said Victor worked with him for 15 years. Tell me about their relationship. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. They were close. Victor was like a son to him, especially after my father died. When grandfather got sick, he told me Victor would help me learn the business. Her voice went hard. Guess he had other plans. Mason nodded, still typing. Victor expected to be named CEO. The board chose me, and Victor decided to make you fail. Mason pulled up the attack timeline. Look at when he planted the code, 3 days after your appointment was announced. He's been planning this from the beginning. To destroy the company my grandfather built? To destroy your credibility. Then swoop in as the savior when you failed. Mason showed her hidden code comments, notes Victor had left for himself. He has investors lined up. They're planning to buy the company cheap when the stock crashes, install him as CEO, and profit when it recovers. Evelyn read the notes. Her hands were shaking. He was going to let thousands of people suffer just to get what he wanted. Yeah, Mason thought about Sophie, about all the families waiting for their money. Some people will do anything for power. Hour 4. Mason broke through to the core infection, the root code that everything else branched from. He stared at it, understanding finally how Victor had designed the whole thing. It's a cascade algorithm, he said. Each infected module triggers the next. If I remove them in the wrong order, the whole thing activates again. But if I do it right, what do you need? Silence, and about 90 minutes. Evelyn stood. You have it. She left. Derek left. The operations center emptied until it was just Mason and the hum of the servers and the blinking cursor waiting for his next command. Mason cracked his knuckles and started typing. The code fought him every step. For every module he neutralized, 2 more tried to activate. It was like defusing a bomb where every wire was connected to every other wire. One wrong cut and everything exploded. But Mason had spent 47 hours studying this system. He knew every line of code, every dependency, every potential failure point. He knew it better than Victor did. Hour 5. 60% of the malicious code neutralized. Hour 6. 85%. At hour 7, Mason isolated the final infected module, the core algorithm, the heart of everything Victor had built. His finger hovered over the execute key. If he was wrong, the whole payment network would collapse permanently. Hundreds of millions of dollars lost forever. The company destroyed. Thousands of jobs gone. If he was right, everything would come back online. Mason thought about Sophie waiting at home, about her absolute faith that her father could fix anything, about all the other kids who needed their parents' paychecks to arrive tomorrow morning. He pressed the key. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the red alerts turned green. Transaction processing, online transfer protocols, online verification systems, online. Derek's voice cracked through the silence. Mason, are you seeing this? Mason pulled up the payment queue. Thousands of transactions sat frozen, waiting to process. He authorized the release. Like water breaking through a dam, money started moving again, direct deposits cleared, transfers completed. The entire payment network, paralyzed for 7 hours, suddenly roared back to life. We're back, Derek said, and Mason could hear him grinning. We're actually back, Mason. You did it. Mason leaned back in his chair. His hands were shaking. His head hurt. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. But Sophie's pancakes were cold by now anyway. The operations center doors opened. Evelyn walked in, followed by what looked like the entire executive team. She looked at the green screens, at the transactions flowing normally, at Mason sitting exhausted in front of the terminal. Is it done? She asked. It's done. All of it? The attack is completely neutralized? Completely. Mason gestured at his screen. I've documented everything, every piece of malicious code, every access point Victor used, every modification he made. It's all there for the investigation. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then she turned to the executives behind her. Gentlemen, give us the room. They left. Derek started to follow. You can stay, Evelyn told him. Then she looked at Mason. Stand up. Mason stood. Evelyn walked closer. For a moment, Mason thought she might fire him again. It would be almost funny. Instead, she held out her hand. Thank you. For coming back, for fixing this, for... She paused. For being the person I should have listened to this morning. Mason shook her hand. You're welcome. I owe you an apology, a real one. Not just for this morning, but for every assumption I made about you, about your work, about your dedication. Evelyn's grip was firm. I was wrong, completely wrong. Yeah, Mason said, you were. I'd like you to stay, not just for this crisis, but permanently. Head of Infrastructure Security. Direct report to me. Name your salary. Mason thought about it, about the humiliation this morning, about being escorted out by security, about watching the company burn from his kitchen table, about all the families who'd suffered because someone with power decided their ambition mattered more than innocent people. I'll stay, he said, on one condition. Name it. My daughter comes first, always. If she needs me, I leave. If she has a school event, I'm there. If she's sick, I'm home. Mason met Evelyn's eyes. The work matters, but she matters more. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Done. And I want that in writing. My lawyer will have it ready tomorrow. She released his hand. Anything else? Mason thought about Victor, about the betrayal, about the attack that had been designed to hurt thousands of innocent people. Yeah, he said. I want to know why. They kept Victor in conference room 7B, 2 security guards outside, legal counsel inside. When Mason and Evelyn entered, Victor looked up from where he sat, hands folded calmly on the table. Mason, Victor smiled. The hero returns. I should have known you'd figure it out. Why? Mason didn't sit. Why hurt all those people? The families waiting for their paychecks? The workers who needed that money? Why? Because they're irrelevant. Victor leaned back. Resources to be managed, variables in an equation. The company would have survived. The money would have been recovered eventually. But Evelyn would have been exposed as incompetent, and I would have taken over, Evelyn finished, with your investors, the ones promising to make you rich if you could just get me out of the way. Victor's smile widened. You were never supposed to be CEO. Your grandfather knew that. He was grooming me for years. Then he got sentimental at the end, decided bloodline mattered more than competence. He looked at Evelyn with something close to pity. You're not qualified for this. You're playing at leadership while people who actually understand this business have to watch you fumble. People like you? People like me. Victor stood. The guards tensed, but he just buttoned his suit jacket. I built this payment infrastructure. I know every line of code. I trained half the engineers in this building, including your hero here. He nodded at Mason. Without me, this company would have collapsed years ago. With you, it almost collapsed today, Mason said. A temporary setback. The market would have recovered. The stock would have rebounded. Victor shrugged. And I would have been positioned to lead the company into its next chapter. Instead, he looked around the conference room. Instead, I'm here, and you're still CEO, for now. Evelyn's face was stone. Get him out of here. The guards moved in. Victor didn't resist, just smiled at Evelyn one last time. You won't last 6 months, he said. You don't have what it takes. Then they led him away. Mason and Evelyn stood in the empty conference room. He's wrong, Mason said quietly. Is he? Evelyn sank into one of the chairs. I've been CEO for less than 12 hours, and I've already nearly destroyed everything. You made a mistake. I made several mistakes. You said so yourself. She looked up at him. I judged you without knowing anything about you. I fired you without listening. I approved a system restart despite your warning. Her voice cracked slightly. I almost let thousands of families suffer because I was too arrogant to admit I might be wrong. Mason sat across from her. You want to know what your grandfather told me when he hired me 6 years ago? Evelyn waited. He said the mark of a good leader isn't perfection. It's what you do after you mess up. Mason met her eyes. You messed up this morning. Bad. But when you realized it, you came to my apartment. You apologized. You brought me back. You gave me what I needed to fix it. That's leadership. That's basic human decency. In this business, Mason gestured at the building around them. That's rare. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. When I saw your apartment, your daughter, those drawings on the wall, she shook her head. I realized I'd been seeing everyone here as just employees, resources, variables, like Victor said, not as people with lives and families and reasons for doing what they do. Yeah, that has to change. Yeah, Mason said again. It does. Evelyn stood, straightened her shoulders. Then let's change it. Mason got home at 11:47 p.m. Sophie was asleep on the couch, Mrs. Chen dozing in the armchair. He paid her double what he usually did. She tried to refuse, but he insisted, and thanked her again. Locked the door behind her, carried Sophie to her bed. She woke up halfway there. Did you fix it? I fixed it. I knew you would. She was asleep again before he finished tucking her in. Mason stood in her doorway for a while, just watching her breathe. 8 years old, half her life without her mother. Growing up with a father who was always exhausted, always working, always trying to save people who didn't even know they needed saving. She deserved better. Maybe now, with Evelyn's written guarantees, she'd get it. Mason's phone buzzed. Text from Derek. News outlets calling. Stock recovered 28% in after-hours trading. Board meeting tomorrow to discuss Victor's arrest. You're being called a hero, Mason typed back. I'm just a dad who knows how to code. He deleted it, tried again. Tell them someone finally listened. Better. He hit send, then turned off his phone completely. Tomorrow he'd deal with interviews and board meetings and whatever came next. Tomorrow he'd start his new job with his new title and his new direct report to the CEO status. Tomorrow would be complicated. But tonight, he was just a father standing in his daughter's doorway, watching her sleep peacefully, knowing that tomorrow morning 4 million people would wake up with their money where it was supposed to be. And that was enough. The morning after saving the company felt exactly like every other morning. Sophie's alarm went off at 6:30. Mason dragged himself out of bed, made toast that burned on one side, helped her find her left shoe under the couch, and drove her to school in rush hour traffic that made them 3 minutes late. Love you, Dad, Sophie said, already halfway out of the car. Love you too. Remember, I'm picking you up today. She stopped, turned back. Really? Really, I promised, didn't I? Sophie's smile could have powered the entire city. Then she was gone, backpack bouncing, running to catch up with her friends. Mason sat in the school drop-off lane, watching her disappear through the double doors. He'd missed 12 pickups this semester. 12 times Mrs. Chen had stepped in. 12 times he'd chosen work over his daughter because someone else's crisis needed solving. Not anymore. His phone rang before he'd even left the parking lot. Evelyn's office. Mr. Reed, the CEO would like you in her office at 9 for the board presentation. Mason checked the dashboard clock. 7:52. I'll be there. Traffic was worse going back. He made it to headquarters at 8:47, grabbed coffee from the lobby cart, real espresso, not the break room disaster, and took the elevator to the executive floor. He'd only been up here twice before. Once for his initial interview 6 years ago. Once when they told him Sarah's life insurance policy through the company would cover her funeral. The elevator doors opened to glass walls and expensive furniture. A receptionist he'd never seen before looked up from her desk. Mason Reed, I have a meeting with... She's expecting you. Third door on the right. Evelyn's office was bigger than his entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A desk that probably cost more than his car. Photographs on the walls. Her grandfather shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons, accepting awards. Evelyn stood by the windows, still in that same style of severe suit. She turned when he entered. You look better, she said. I slept. Mason set his coffee on the conference table. What's this about? The board wants a full briefing on yesterday's attack, Victor's arrest, the recovery. She gestured at a stack of folders. Legal needs your statement. PR wants to issue a press release. The FBI called at 6 this morning. FBI? Corporate sabotage. Financial crimes. They're building a case against Victor and his investors. Evelyn sat down, gestured for Mason to do the same. This is going to be complicated. Mason thought about Sophie's smile in the drop-off lane, about the promise he'd made. How complicated? Depositions, testimony, congressional inquiries possibly. Evelyn opened one of the folders. The attack froze payments to 412 other companies. Some of them are preparing lawsuits. Others want testimony about our security failures. Our security didn't fail. One person with administrative access sabotaged the system. Try explaining that to their lawyers. She slid the folder across to him. This is what we're facing. Mason flipped through the pages. Lawsuits, investigations, subpoenas, months of legal battles stretching into the future. I have a daughter, he said. I know. I pick her up from school today. That's non-negotiable. Understood. Evelyn pulled out another folder. Which is why I had legal draft this last night. The contract specified his salary, nearly triple what he'd been making before. Title, Chief Security Officer, reporting directly to the CEO. Standard benefits plus emergency childcare, flexible scheduling, and a clause that allowed him to work remotely when family needs required it. And at the bottom, in bold, employee retains right to prioritize family obligations above work requirements. Company acknowledges this priority and agrees to accommodate accordingly. Mason read it twice. You're serious? Completely. Evelyn pulled out a pen. Sign it, and it's official. Why? Because yesterday taught me something. She leaned back. I spent my whole life preparing to run this company. Business school, management training, leadership seminars. I thought I knew what it took to be CEO. She gestured at the photographs on the wall. My grandfather built something important. I was determined to prove I could protect it. So I almost destroyed it in my first 12 hours because I didn't understand the most basic thing about leadership. Evelyn met his eyes. The people who actually make this company work aren't the executives. They're not the board members or the investors or the people with impressive titles. They're the engineers pulling double shifts to keep the systems running. They're the single parents sacrificing sleep to protect strangers they'll never meet. They're you. Mason didn't say anything. I can't afford to lose people like you because I'm too rigid to accommodate their lives. Evelyn tapped the contract. So yes, I'm serious. Your daughter comes first, always. And if that means you miss a board meeting or leave early or work from home for a week, that's fine, because you're worth more to this company happy than miserable. Mason picked up the pen, signed his name, slid the contract back. Don't make me regret this, Evelyn said. Don't make me regret coming back. She almost smiled. Then the office door opened and a woman in her 50s walked in carrying a tablet and looking stressed. The board's assembled. They're ready for you. Thank you, Patricia. Evelyn stood. Mason, ready to meet the people who actually run this place? The boardroom was all dark wood and leather chairs. 12 people sat around a table that could have doubled as a landing strip. Mason recognized a few faces from news articles, industry veterans, former politicians, the kind of people who made decisions affecting millions of lives before breakfast. They all turned to look at him when he walked in. Gentlemen, ladies? Evelyn took her seat at the head of the table. This is Mason Reed, our new chief security officer. He's the person who saved the company yesterday. A woman at the far end leaned forward, silver hair, sharp eyes. The employee you fired? The same. Interesting management strategy. It was a mistake, Evelyn said flatly. One I've corrected. A man in his 60s cleared his throat. Ms. Carter, perhaps you could explain how an attack of this magnitude went undetected for 3 weeks? It didn't go undetected. Evelyn nodded at Mason. Mr. Reed identified the threat and attempted to warn management. We failed to listen. We? The silver-haired woman raised an eyebrow. Or you? Me, Evelyn said. I dismissed his warnings. I fired him during a critical security incident. I approved the system restart that triggered the attack. Those were my decisions. My failures. The room went quiet. Mason had been in enough corporate meetings to know this wasn't normal. CEOs didn't admit fault. They distributed blame, deflected responsibility, protected themselves first. However, Evelyn continued, those failures have been addressed. Mr. Reed has been reinstated with expanded authority. We've implemented new protocols requiring security approval before any major system changes, and we've begun a complete audit of all administrative access privileges. What about Victor Hale? A younger board member, maybe 40, looked at his notes. 15 years with the company. Direct report to the former CEO. How did we miss that he was planning corporate sabotage? Mason spoke for the first time. You didn't miss it. You just didn't want to see it. 12 faces turned to him. Explain, the silver-haired woman said. Victor had access to everything. He'd built most of the payment infrastructure himself. When your former CEO died, Victor expected to be promoted. Instead, you brought in Evelyn. Mason gestured at the room. How many of you voted against that decision? Silence. That's what I thought. Mason pulled out his laptop, connected it to the boardroom display. Victor's attack code appeared on screen. Victor didn't hide what he was doing. He couldn't, not completely. There are logs, access patterns, unusual modifications to critical systems, but nobody checked because nobody questioned him. He'd been here too long. He was too trusted. Are you suggesting we failed in our oversight duties? The 60-year-old man looked offended. I'm saying Victor was right about one thing. This company had become complacent. Mason pulled up more data. Look at these security audits. The last comprehensive one was 3 years ago. Your incident response plan hasn't been updated since 2019. Half your senior engineers are so overworked they're making basic mistakes. We've been profitable, someone protested. You've been lucky. Mason closed the laptop. Victor almost destroyed you because your systems were vulnerable and your culture didn't reward people for pointing out problems. That's not about one bad actor. That's institutional failure. The boardroom erupted. 3 people started talking at once. Someone demanded to know who Mason thought he was. Someone else wanted to know why they were being lectured by an employee who'd been fired yesterday. Evelyn's voice cut through the noise. Because he's right. Everyone stopped. My grandfather built this company on innovation and integrity. Somewhere along the way, we lost both. Evelyn stood. We became focused on quarterly earnings and stock prices. We stopped investing in our people. We stopped listening to warnings. We created an environment where someone like Victor could sabotage us from the inside and nobody noticed until it was too late. So what do you propose? The silver-haired woman asked. A complete overhaul. Security, culture, management practices. Evelyn looked at Mason. Starting with the people who actually know what they're doing. The meeting lasted 3 more hours. Mason answered questions about the attack, the recovery, the vulnerabilities that still existed. Some board members were hostile. Others were genuinely interested. A few looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. When it finally ended, Mason's head was pounding. You did well, Evelyn said as they walked back to her office. I called them complacent. They are complacent. Someone needed to say it. She checked her phone, frowned. The FBI wants to meet this afternoon. Can you make it? Mason thought about Sophie. School ended at 3:15. What time? 2 o'clock. I'll be there, but I leave at 3 no matter what. Understood. The FBI sent 2 agents. A man in his 40s who introduced himself as Special Agent Torres and a younger woman named Agent Kim. They set up in a conference room with recording equipment and asked the same questions Mason had already answered 6 times. Walk us through how you discovered the attack, Torres said. Mason explained the anomaly detection, the pattern analysis, the 47 hours of investigation. Agent Kim took notes. Torres just listened, occasionally asking for clarification. And you documented everything? Torres asked. Everything. Logs, screenshots, code samples. It's all time-stamped and backed up. We'll need copies of those files. Mason hesitated. Some of that information is proprietary. Some of that information is evidence in a federal investigation. Torres leaned forward. Victor Hale didn't just attack your company. Those frozen transactions affected federal agencies, Social Security payments, veterans benefits. You triggered a national security incident. I didn't trigger anything. I tried to stop it. Semantics. Torres pulled out a document. This is a subpoena for all records related to the attack. You can comply voluntarily, or we can make it official. Mason took the document, read it, handed it to Evelyn, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner. Give them what they need, she said. It's going to take time to compile everything. How much time? Agent Kim asked. Mason checked his watch. 2:47. Not today. I have somewhere to be. Torres raised an eyebrow. Mr. Reed, this is a federal investigation. And I have a daughter to pick up from school. Mason stood. I'll have the files ready tomorrow morning. Mr. Reed, tomorrow. Mason headed for the door. You want to arrest me for being a responsible parent? Go ahead. Otherwise, we're done here. He didn't wait for a response. Sophie was waiting by the flagpole when Mason pulled up at 3:14. She climbed in, threw her backpack in the back seat, and grinned at him. You actually came. I promised, didn't I? Yeah, but you promised lots of things. No judgment in her voice, just fact. Mason felt that like a knife. I know. I'm going to get better at keeping them. Mrs. Chen says you're a hero. Mrs. Chen watches too much news. She says you saved millions of people. Sophie buckled her seatbelt. Did you? Mason pulled out of the school parking lot. I fixed a computer problem, that's all. That's not what the news says. Since when do you watch the news? Since your face was on it this morning. Sophie pulled out her phone, the basic one he'd gotten her for emergencies only. You're trending on Twitter. I don't want to know. Hashtag Tech Hero. People are calling you the guy who saved everyone's paycheck. Mason groaned. Great. There's a reporter lady who wants to interview you. She called the school. What? Mason nearly ran a red light. They called the school? Yeah, Mrs. Patterson, the principal. She told them to stop bothering you, but she said you might want to call them back because they're not going away. Mason's hands tightened on the wheel. This was exactly what he didn't want. Attention, cameras, his private life becoming public property. Can we get ice cream? Sophie asked. What? Ice cream. You said we'd go for ice cream when you picked me up. Mason couldn't remember saying that, but if Sophie said he probably had. Yeah, ice cream sounds good. They went to the place on 5th Street that made everything from scratch. Sophie got chocolate chip cookie dough. Mason got black coffee because the idea of eating anything made his stomach hurt. They sat outside at a metal table, watching people walk by. Sophie swung her legs and ate her ice cream with the focused intensity only 8-year-olds could manage. Dad? Yeah? Are you going to be famous now? Mason thought about the FBI agents, the board meeting, the reporters calling Sophie's school. I hope not. But you did something important. I did my job. Mrs. Chen says doing your job when it's hard is what makes someone a hero. Mason looked at his daughter. When had she gotten so smart? Mrs. Chen is a very wise person. She also says you need to eat more. You're too skinny. I eat. Not real food, just coffee and those protein bar things. Sophie pointed her spoon at him. You're supposed to set a good example. You sound like your mother. Sophie's face lit up. She didn't remember Sarah well. She'd only been 4 when the cancer took her, but she loved hearing about her. Tell me a mom story, she said. Which one? The pancake one. Mason had told this story 100 times, but Sophie never got tired of it. Your mom couldn't cook at all, burned everything she touched, but when she was pregnant with you, she got it in her head that she needed to learn how to make pancakes. Because she was craving them. So she bought all the ingredients, followed the recipe exactly, and somehow created something that was burned on the outside and raw in the middle. Sophie giggled. What did you do? I ate them, every bite. Told her they were delicious. Even though they were gross? Even though they were terrible. Mason smiled at the memory. And then she cried because she knew I was lying, and then we both laughed, and then we ordered pancakes from the diner and ate them in bed at midnight. Sophie finished her ice cream, scraping the last bits from the cup. I wish I remembered her better. Me too, kiddo. Do you think she'd be proud of you for yesterday? Mason thought about Sarah, about her fierce protectiveness, her inability to let injustice stand, her absolute certainty that doing the right thing mattered, even when it was hard. Yeah, he said, I think she would be. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Sophie's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowned. What? Mason asked. Kids at school are texting me about you. They saw the news. What are they saying? That my dad is cool. She looked up at him. Are you okay with people knowing about what you did? Honestly, no. I just want to do my job and come home to you. But that's not going to happen, is it? Mason looked at his daughter, 8 years old and already understanding how the world worked. Probably not. Not for a while. Okay. Sophie put her phone away. Then we'll deal with it together. Mason felt something tight in his chest loosen. Yeah, together. His phone rang. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Same number. You should probably answer that, Sophie said. Mason did. Hello? Mr. Reed, this is Amanda Price from Channel 7 News. I'd love to speak with you about your role in yesterday's cyber attack recovery. Do you have a few minutes? No? I understand you're busy, but our viewers are very interested in... I said no. Mason hung up. The phone rang again, different number. Is it another reporter? Sophie asked. Mason checked the caller ID, Evelyn's office. He answered. The press is at the building, Patricia said without preamble. 3 news vans. They're asking for you specifically. Tell them I left. I did. They're not leaving. She sounded tired. Miss Carter wants to know if you'd be willing to do a short statement, just to get them to go away. Mason looked at Sophie, at the ice cream shop, at the normal afternoon he'd promised himself. Tomorrow, he said. I'll do it tomorrow. They're pretty insistent. Tomorrow. Mason ended the call. Sophie was watching him carefully. You okay? Yeah, just... Mason rubbed his face. This is going to be weird for a while. Weirder than when Mom died and everyone at school looked at me like I was going to break? Mason winced. Maybe not that weird. Then we'll be fine. Sophie stood, threw her cup in the trash. Can we go home? I have homework. You have homework and you wanted ice cream first? Priorities, Dad. Mason laughed despite everything. You're definitely your mother's daughter. They drove home through traffic that was somehow worse than the morning. Mason's phone rang 6 more times. He ignored all of them. When they got to the apartment, there was a reporter waiting by the door. Mr. Reed, just a few questions about... No comment. Mason put himself between the reporter and Sophie, unlocked the door, got them both inside. Dad, that was kind of rude, Sophie said. That was necessary. Mason locked the door, then checked that all the windows were closed. These people don't care about us. They care about the story. But you did something good. Why can't you just tell them that? Because the minute I start talking to them, they own the narrative. They'll twist what I say. They'll dig into our lives. They'll turn yesterday into something it wasn't. Sophie dropped her backpack by the couch. What was it then? A crisis that got fixed. By you. By me doing my job. Mason went to the kitchen, started pulling out ingredients for dinner. Real dinner, not the frozen meals he usually relied on. That's all it was. Sophie didn't argue, but Mason could feel her disapproval. She disappeared into her room to do homework. Mason cooked chicken and vegetables, something Sarah used to make that he'd never quite gotten right. It came out dry, but Sophie ate it without complaint. After dinner, Sophie did math worksheets at the kitchen table while Mason sat with his laptop, trying to compile the files the FBI had requested. 3 weeks of data, thousands of log entries, code samples that would need to be sanitized to remove proprietary information before he could hand them over. Dad? Sophie looked up from her homework. What's a polynomial? Mason explained. Helped her work through 2 problems. Went back to his files. His phone rang again. This time it was Derek. Tell me you're not watching the news, Derek said. I'm not watching the news. Good. Don't. Derek sounded stressed. They're running your employee photo, the one from 6 years ago. So? So you look like you're 12 in that photo. Combined with the single dad angle, they're making you into this tragic hero figure. It's getting weird. Mason closed his eyes. How weird? There's a Facebook group dedicated to you. Twitter hashtags. Someone started a GoFundMe to buy you a new car. I don't need a new car. They don't care. They want to help the poor, exhausted, single father who saved everyone's money. Derek paused. Evelyn wants to do damage control. PR is suggesting a press conference tomorrow. Controlled environment. You make a statement, answer a few questions, then we move on. I don't want to do a press conference. I know. But they're not going away until you give them something. Derek's voice softened. Look, I get it. You're private. You don't want attention, but you're in it now whether you like it or not. Might as well control the narrative before it controls you. Mason looked at Sophie, bent over her math homework, completely focused. This was his life. His daughter. His small apartment with its stack of bills and its drawings taped to the wall. He didn't want cameras in here. Didn't want strangers analyzing his choices or judging his parenting or turning his grief into entertainment. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. Derek hung up. Sophie finished her homework at 8:30. They watched half an hour of a cooking competition show, her current obsession, and then Mason sent her to brush her teeth and get ready for bed. When he went to tuck her in, she was already under the covers, holding the stuffed elephant Sarah had bought her in the hospital. Love you, kiddo, Mason said, kissing her forehead. Love you too. Sophie grabbed his hand before he could leave. Dad? Are you scared? Of what? Everything changing. Because of yesterday. Mason sat on the edge of her bed. A little, yeah. Me too. Sophie hugged the elephant tighter. What if people at school start treating me different? What if they only want to be my friend because you're on TV? Then they're not real friends. That's easy to say. You're right. It is. Mason brushed hair out of her face. But you're smart. You'll figure out who's genuine and who's not. What if I can't? Then you call me and I'll come get you. Anytime, even in the middle of the day. Sophie considered this. Promise? Promise. She settled deeper into the blankets. Okay. Good night. Mason turned off the light, left her door cracked open the way she liked, went back to the living room and his laptop and the mountain of work waiting for him. But instead of working, he pulled up the news. Derek was right. His employee photo was everywhere. Younger Mason, smiling awkwardly at the camera, hair still dark, eyes not yet marked by years of exhaustion and grief. The headlines were worse than he'd imagined. Single father saves millions after being wrongly fired. Tech hero works for 47 hours straight to prevent disaster. The employee they fired and then begged to return. Someone had found out about Sarah, about the cancer, about him raising Sophie alone. The stories were full of details he'd never shared publicly, details that could only have come from people he knew, people he'd trusted. Mason closed the laptop before he could read more. Tomorrow he'd deal with the FBI, the press conference, the reporters who wouldn't leave him alone, the world that had suddenly decided he was interesting. But tonight, he was just a father in a quiet apartment, listening to his daughter breathe in the next room, trying to hold on to the simple life they'd built together. Outside, the city hummed, cars passed, someone's TV played too loud through the thin walls. Normal sounds, normal life. Mason wanted to believe it could stay that way. He knew better. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. Mason woke up at 5, couldn't fall back asleep, and spent 2 hours staring at his ceiling, wondering how his life had turned into this. By 7, he'd given up on rest entirely and was making pancakes, actual pancakes, not the burned disasters he usually produced, when Sophie shuffled into the kitchen, still in her pajamas. "You're up early," she said, climbing onto a stool. "Couldn't sleep." "Because of the thing today?" Mason flipped a pancake. It landed perfectly. Small victories. "Yeah, because of the thing." Sophie watched him cook for a minute. "You don't have to do it if you don't want to." "I kind of do." "Why?" "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know, but the reporters won't stop until they get something. Evelyn thinks if I give them a statement, answer some questions, they'll move on to the next story." "Will they?" Mason slid pancakes onto her plate. "Probably not, but maybe it'll slow them down." Sophie drowned everything in syrup. "What are you going to say?" "I don't know yet." "You should tell them the truth." "Which truth? That I got fired for doing my job? That I fixed a problem nobody else could? That I just want to be left alone?" Mason poured himself more coffee. "There's a lot of truths here, kiddo. Tell them you did it for people like me, for the families." Mason looked at his daughter, 8 years old and already understanding the world better than most adults. "When did you get so smart?" "I have a good teacher." She grinned, gap-toothed and perfect. Mason got Sophie to school by 7:45, endured her hug that lasted a fraction longer than usual, and drove to headquarters through morning traffic that gave him too much time to think. The parking garage was full of news vans. Reporters spotted his car and started moving toward him before he'd even turned off the engine. He made it to the elevator by keeping his head down and saying no comment 17 times. Inside the building wasn't much better. People stared. A few tried to approach him. Someone from accounting actually asked for a selfie. "Not right now," Mason said, and kept walking. Evelyn's office was a refuge. Patricia let him in without a word, and he found Evelyn standing by her windows with a cup of coffee and an expression that said she hadn't slept much either. "Ready?" she asked. "No." "Good. That makes 2 of us." She turned from the window. "PR wrote you a statement. You don't have to use it, but it hits the main points without giving them anything to twist." Mason took the paper she offered. "Read it," handed it back. "This makes me sound like a victim." "You were fired unjustly." "I was fired because you made a snap judgment. That's not the same as being a victim." Mason sat down. "I don't want to do this if it's just going to be about me versus you. That's not what happened." "What do you want it to be about?" "The truth. The actual truth." Mason leaned forward. "Victor sabotaged the company because he thought he deserved your job. He was willing to hurt innocent people to get what he wanted. That's the story. Not me being some tragic hero." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "PR thinks the human interest angle is what will resonate. PR wants to sell a story. I want to go back to my normal life." Mason stood. "Look, I'll do this press conference. I'll answer their questions, but I'm not reading some script that turns me into someone I'm not. What if they ask about your daughter, about Sarah? Then I'll tell them it's none of their business. They won't accept that. I don't care." Mason headed for the door. 10 o'clock, right?" "Mason?" Evelyn's voice stopped him. Thank you for doing this even though you don't want to. Don't thank me yet. I might make everything worse. The press room was packed. Mason counted at least 30 reporters, twice that many cameras, lights, microphones. The entire setup designed to turn a simple conversation into theater. Evelyn sat at the main table with the company's head of PR, a woman named Carol, who looked like she survived on stress and espresso. They'd left a chair for Mason between them. He sat. The lights were too bright, the room too hot. Every face watching him expecting something he wasn't sure he could give. Carol leaned over. Let Ms. Carter open. She'll make a brief statement about the incident, then introduce you. You give your statement, we take questions for 15 minutes, then we're done. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and don't let them bait you into saying anything you'll regret. Got it. Carol didn't look convinced. Evelyn stood. The room quieted immediately. Thank you all for coming. I'll keep this brief. 2 days ago, our company experienced a targeted cyber attack designed to cripple our payment infrastructure. The attack was orchestrated by a former executive and was neutralized thanks to the extraordinary efforts of our security team, particularly our chief security officer, Mason Reed. Hands shot up. Voices called out questions. Evelyn ignored them. Mr. Reed will make a statement and then we'll take your questions. Please be respectful of his time and his privacy. She sat. Mason stood. The room seemed to get hotter. He looked at the reporters, at the cameras, at all these people waiting to turn his life into content. My name is Mason Reed. I'm a security engineer. I'm also a single father raising an 8-year-old daughter. He hadn't planned to mention Sophie, but it came out anyway. 2 days ago, I identified a security threat to our payment infrastructure. I spent 47 hours trying to contain it and warn the right people. I was fired for my efforts. The room erupted. Carol looked like she might have a heart attack. Evelyn stayed perfectly still. Mason kept going. I was rehired after the attack succeeded, and the company realized they needed someone who actually understood what was happening. I fixed the problem. The system is secure. That's the story. Mr. Reed? A reporter in the front row stood. Is it true you were asleep at your desk when the CEO fired you? Yes. Why? Because I'd been working for 2 days straight trying to protect people I've never met from losing money they needed to survive. Another reporter. Do you hold Ms. Carter responsible for the attack's success? I hold Victor Hale responsible. He planted the malicious code. He sabotaged the company. Ms. Carter made a mistake in firing me, but the attack would have happened regardless. A mistake that cost the company nearly $1 billion? Mason looked at Evelyn. She met his eyes, nodded slightly. Permission to be honest. Yeah, Mason said. A mistake that cost a lot. But she owned it. She apologized. She brought me back and gave me what I needed to fix it. That's more than most executives would do. The questions came faster. How did he discover the attack? What made him suspect Victor? How did he manage to work for 47 hours? Where was his daughter during all this? Was he planning to sue the company? How much was his new salary? Did he blame Evelyn? Did he think she was qualified to be CEO? Mason answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't. When someone asked about Sarah, about how he managed single parenthood in a demanding job, he paused. My wife died 4 years ago, cancer. Since then, it's been me and my daughter figuring things out together. His voice stayed level, barely. That's all I'm going to say about my family. But Mr. Reed, our viewers would love to know how you balance. I said that's all. Mason looked at Carol. Are we done? We have 5 more minutes. I'm done. Mason stood. Mr. Reed, just a few more questions. Mason walked off the platform. Behind him, he heard Evelyn thanking everyone for coming, heard Carol trying to maintain control, heard the shouted questions following him out the door. He made it to the elevator before Evelyn caught up. That was not what we discussed, she said. I know. You basically told them I was incompetent. I told them you made a mistake. There's a difference. The elevator doors opened. Mason stepped in. You coming? Evelyn followed. The doors closed, giving them temporary privacy. PR is going to have a meltdown, she said. Probably. The board is going to want my head. Also probably. And you don't care. Mason looked at her. I care. But I'm not going to lie to make everyone comfortable. You screwed up. You admitted it. You fixed it. That's actually pretty rare in corporate America. If the board can't handle honesty, That's their problem. The elevator reached the executive floor. Evelyn didn't move to exit. My grandfather used to say something, she said quietly. He said the difference between a good leader and a great one is whether they can handle people telling them the truth. Sounds like a smart man. He was. Evelyn finally stepped out. He also would have liked you. You don't give a damn about politics or optics. You just do what's right. I don't know about that. I do. Evelyn headed toward her office. Take the rest of the day. You've earned it. Mason's phone was ringing before he made it back to his car. Derek. Then Patricia. Then a number he didn't recognize. He ignored all of them, drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks from Sophie's school, and sat in a corner booth with a laptop and the FBI files he still needed to finish compiling. The coffee shop was quiet. A few students typing papers. An elderly couple sharing a muffin. Nobody recognized him. Nobody cared that he existed. It was perfect. He worked for 3 hours, organizing logs and code samples, removing proprietary information while preserving the evidence the FBI needed. His phone buzzed constantly. He put it on silent and kept working. At 2:30, he packed up and drove to Sophie's school. Early, but he wanted to be there before the other parents. Wanted to avoid the questions and the stares and the inevitable conversations about that thing on the news. He was sitting in the pickup line when someone tapped on his window. Mrs. Chen, carrying reusable shopping bags and smiling like she knew a secret. Mason rolled down the window. Hi. I saw you on TV, she said. Very handsome, very serious. Thanks, I think. All the ladies in my building are talking about you. They want to know if you're single. Mason felt his face heat. Mrs. Chen. What? You're young. You should meet someone. I'm really not interested in dating right now. Your wife has been gone 4 years. You think she'd want you alone forever? Mason didn't have an answer for that. Sarah probably wouldn't want him alone. She'd want him happy. But happy felt like a foreign concept these days. I should go, Mrs. Chen said, patting his arm through the window. But you think about it. Life is short. Don't waste it being lonely. She walked away before he could respond. Mason sat there feeling exposed and uncomfortable and weirdly touched that Mrs. Chen cared enough to be nosy. Sophie came out at 3:15 with her friend Emma. They were giggling about something, heads bent together. Then Emma saw Mason's car and her eyes went wide. Is that your dad? Emma's voice carried across the parking lot. The one from the news? Sophie's smile dimmed slightly. Yeah. That's so cool. My mom says he's a hero. He's just my dad. But Emma was already running over, dragging Sophie with her. Mason got out of the car, tried to look friendly instead of tired. Hi, Mr. Reed. I'm Emma, Sophie's best friend. Is it true you saved like 1 million people? More like 4 million, Mason said. And I didn't save them. I just fixed a computer problem. That's not what the news says. The news likes to make things sound more exciting than they are. Emma looked disappointed. Sophie looked grateful. They said goodbye and Sophie climbed into the car, quiet in a way that made Mason's chest tight. You okay? He asked. Everyone was talking about you today. During lunch, during recess, Mrs. Patterson even mentioned you during announcements. Sophie buckled her seatbelt without looking at him. It was weird. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. You just did your job. She paused. But Emma's right. You did save a lot of people. Sophie, I know you don't want to be famous. I get it. But maybe it's not the worst thing that people know you're good at what you do. Mason pulled out of the parking lot. It's not about being good at my job. It's about privacy. About keeping our life separate from all this. But it's not separate anymore. That reporter found out about Mom, about me, about where we live. Sophie's voice got smaller. What if they don't stop? Then we deal with it. How? Mason didn't have an answer. He drove them home through afternoon traffic, parked in their usual spot, and found another reporter waiting by their building entrance. A different one this time. Younger, more aggressive. Mr. Reed, Channel 4 News, do you have a moment? No. Mason took Sophie's hand. Just one question about your relationship with CEO Evelyn Carter. Is it true she personally came to your home to apologize? Mason kept walking. The reporter followed. Our sources say you were reluctant to return. What changed your mind? Was it the salary increase? The new title? They reached the door. Mason got it unlocked. got Sophie inside. Mr. Reed, the public has a right to know. The public has a right to exactly nothing about my personal life. Mason turned to face the reporter. I did a press conference. I answered questions. That's all you're getting. But leave us alone, or I'll call the police and report you for harassment. Mason closed the door, locked it, stood there breathing hard while Sophie watched with wide eyes. That was kind of scary, she said. Yeah. Mason's hands were shaking. Yeah, it was. They ordered pizza for dinner. Mason tried to work but couldn't focus. His phone kept buzzing with messages from numbers he didn't know. Friend requests on social media he barely used. Emails from reporters, from random people offering advice, from someone claiming to be a lawyer who wanted to discuss opportunities. At 8 o'clock, Derek called. Mason almost didn't answer. You need to see this, Derek said without preamble. See what? Twitter. The press conference video is everywhere, and people are, well, they're on your side. Mason pulled up Twitter on his laptop. The video of him walking out of the press conference had been clipped, edited, set to music. The hashtag Mason Reed was trending. People were calling him authentic, brave, a real American hero standing up to corporate incompetence. This is not what I wanted, Mason said. I know, but it might actually help. How? The board was pissed about what you said, but public sentiment is so strongly in your favor that they can't touch you without looking like villains. Derek sounded almost amused. You accidentally made yourself untouchable. Great. That's exactly what I was going for. Mason, I know this sucks, but maybe there's an upside. You've got leverage now. You can push for real changes. Security improvements, better work-life balance policies, things that help everyone. Mason thought about the engineers working 60-hour weeks, about the single parents like him struggling to balance jobs and kids, about all the people grinding themselves down because the company demanded it. I'll think about it, he said. After Derek hung up, Mason sat with his laptop open, watching strangers on the internet discuss his life. Most of it was supportive. Some of it was invasive. A few people had found old photos of him and Sarah, had posted them with captions about tragic love stories and devoted fathers. He closed the laptop before he could read more. Sophie appeared in her pajamas, ready for bed. Can I ask you something? Always. Are you sorry that you went back to work, that you fixed everything? Mason pulled her into a hug. I'm not sorry I fixed it. Those people needed their money, their paychecks. I'm just sorry about what came after. The fame stuff? Yeah, the fame stuff. Sophie hugged him tighter. It'll get better. People will forget. They always do. Mason hoped she was right, but the next morning brought fresh evidence that she wasn't. The apartment building was surrounded by reporters when Mason went to get his car. 6 vans. Dozens of people with cameras and microphones. They swarmed him the second he stepped outside. Mr. Reed, is it true you're writing a book? Mr. Reed, have you been contacted about movie rights? Mr. Reed, what's your response to Victor Hale's lawyer claiming you fabricated evidence? That last one stopped him. What? A reporter shoved a phone in his face. It showed a statement from Victor's defense attorney claiming Mason had planted evidence to frame an innocent man, that the attack was either accidental or the result of Mason's own incompetence, that Mason was being protected by a CEO desperate to cover her own failures. I have no comment, Mason said, and pushed through to his car. But his hands were shaking when he started the engine. Victor was fighting back. Of course he was. He had money, lawyers, connections, and he was going to drag Mason through every possible nightmare to save himself. Mason's phone rang. FBI Special Agent Torres. Have you seen Victor's statement? Torres asked. Just now. It's bullshit. We've verified your evidence independently, but his lawyer is good, and he's going to make this messy. Torres paused. How solid are you, mentally, emotionally? Because this is going to get worse before it gets better. Mason thought about Sophie, about Mrs. Chen's shopping bags and Emma's wide eyes and the reporters camped outside his building. I'll manage, he said. Make sure you do. We need you credible when this goes to trial. Torres hung up. Mason sat in his car in the parking garage, trying to breathe evenly, trying not to think about lawyers and trials and his life being picked apart in public, trying to remember why he'd agreed to any of this. His phone buzzed. Text from Evelyn. Victor's lawyer is an attack dog. Don't engage. Company legal will handle it. Then another text. How are you holding up? Mason typed back. Been better. Her response came immediately. Come to my office. We need to talk. The executive floor was quieter than usual. Patricia waved him through to Evelyn's office, where he found her with 3 people he didn't recognize. 2 men in expensive suits. 1 woman with severe glasses and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools. Mason, this is our legal team, Evelyn said. Richard handles corporate litigation. James is our criminal defense specialist, and Sandra manages crisis communication. Sandra spoke first. Mr. Reed, Victor's attorney is going to try to destroy your credibility. We need to prepare you for what's coming. Prepare me how? They'll dig into your past, your finances, your employment history, your wife's medical records if they can get them. Anything they can use to suggest you're unstable, vindictive, or incompetent. Mason felt sick. Sarah's medical records are private. They'll try anyway. And they'll publicize your struggles as a single parent, paint you as overwhelmed, making mistakes, possibly falsifying evidence out of desperation or malice. That's insane. That's defense strategy. Richard leaned forward. The good news is we have an airtight case. Your documentation is pristine. The FBI has verified everything independently. Victor's lawyer is grasping at straws. The bad news, James said, is that straws can still hurt, especially in the court of public opinion. I don't care about public opinion. You should. Sandra pulled out her tablet. You're trending on 3 different platforms. Your press conference video has 2 million views. People are invested in your story. If Victor's team successfully turns you into the villain, it could impact the trial. How? Jury selection? Public pressure on the judge? Media bias? Sandra showed him headlines from that morning. Most were supportive. A few weren't. Right now, you're the hero. We need to keep it that way. Mason looked at Evelyn. Is this really necessary? I think so. Victor has everything to lose. He's going to fight dirty. Then let him fight. I've got nothing to hide. Everyone has something to hide, Sandra said. Everyone has moments they're not proud of. Decisions that look bad out of context. We need to know what those are before Victor's team finds them. Mason stood. I'm not doing this. I'm not sitting here cataloging my mistakes so you can spin them before someone else does. I did my job. I documented everything. If that's not enough, then I don't know what is. Mr. Reed, I have to pick up my daughter. Mason headed for the door. Mason. Evelyn's voice stopped him. They're trying to help. I know, but I didn't sign up for this. I didn't want any of this. He looked back at the legal team. I'll testify when the FBI needs me. I'll provide whatever documentation they request. But I'm not playing PR games with my life. He left before anyone could argue. The reporters were still outside his building when he got home that afternoon with Sophie. They'd learned his schedule. Knew when school ended. When they'd return. Don't look at them, Mason told Sophie. Just walk straight to the door. They made it inside to a chorus of shouted questions. Sophie was quiet on the stairs. Quiet while Mason unlocked the apartment. Quiet until the door was closed and locked behind them. Then she burst into tears. Mason dropped to his knees, pulled her close. Hey, it's okay. It's not okay, Sophie sobbed into his shoulder. They're everywhere. They won't leave us alone. I just want things to be normal. I know, me too. Why can't they just go away? Mason didn't have an answer. He just held his daughter while she cried, feeling helpless and angry and completely out of his depth. When Sophie finally calmed down, he made her hot chocolate and put on her favorite show. She curled up on the couch with her elephant, eyes red and puffy, looking younger than 8. Mason's phone rang. He almost ignored it, but the caller ID said Mrs. Chen. Hello? Mason, are you okay? I see the reporters outside. They were asking me about you. What did you tell them? Nothing. I told them to mind their business, but... She hesitated. Maybe you and Sophie should stay somewhere else for a few days? Until they get bored? We shouldn't have to leave our home. No, you shouldn't, but sometimes we do things we shouldn't have to do because it's better for our children. Mason looked at Sophie on the couch, at her tear-stained face and exhausted eyes. I'll think about it, he said. But he didn't have to think long. That night, at nearly midnight, someone knocked on the apartment door. Mason checked the peephole. A man he didn't recognize, holding what looked like legal papers. Mr. Reed, I have a subpoena. Mason opened the door slightly. For what? Victor Hale's defense team is requesting your personal phone records, email correspondence, and employment files dating back 6 years. The man handed over the envelope. You've been served. The door across the hall opened. Mrs. Chen peeked out, worried. It's fine, Mason told her. Just work stuff. But it wasn't fine. And after the process server left, after Mason read through the subpoena that demanded access to virtually every private communication he'd had for years, he sat on his couch in the dark and finally admitted that Sophie was right. Things weren't going to go back to normal. This was normal now. Mason spent 3 hours that night going through his phone records, his emails, his text messages from the past 6 years, looking for anything that Victor's lawyers could twist, anything that might make him look bad. He found plenty. Frustrated messages to coworkers about management decisions, complaints about working conditions, a particularly angry email he'd sent to HR 2 years ago when they denied his request for bereavement leave after Sarah's death because he'd already used his allocated days. He'd called them heartless, among other things. Mason saved screenshots of everything potentially damaging, sent them to the company's legal team with a note that said simply, "Here's what they're going to find." Sandra called him at 6 a.m. "You should have told us about the HR incident. You should have asked." Mason was already awake, making coffee in the dark kitchen. "Is it going to be a problem?" "It makes you look combative, difficult to work with." "I was difficult to work with after my wife died and they wouldn't give me time to grieve? Yeah, guilty as charged," Sandra sighed. "I'm trying to help you." "I know. I'm sorry." Mason rubbed his eyes. "What do we do?" "We get ahead of it. Acknowledge the incident, but frame it as a grieving father fighting for basic human decency." Which it was. "Okay. And Mason, no more surprises. If there's anything else in your past that could come out, I need to know now." Mason thought about the year after Sarah died, the drinking, the nights he'd left Sophie with Mrs. Chen because he couldn't function, the morning he'd shown up to work still drunk from the night before, and Derek had covered for him. "There might be some things," he said. "Schedule a meeting with me today. We'll go through everything." After Sophie left for school, escorted past the reporters by Mrs. Chen, who glared at every camera like they were personally offending her, Mason drove to headquarters. The morning news was playing on the lobby monitors. His face appeared on screen with the headline, "Tech Hero Faces Legal Battle." He took the stairs instead of the elevator, avoiding people. Sandra's office was on the 3rd floor. She had coffee waiting, 2 legal pads, and an expression that suggested she'd already had a long day despite it being 9 a.m. "Start from the beginning," she said. "After your wife died." "What happened?" Mason told her. About the drinking. About the days he couldn't get out of bed. About the time he'd snapped at a junior engineer who'd made a mistake and reduced her to tears. About calling in sick when he wasn't sick, just broken. About the performance review that had almost gotten him fired. Sandra took notes without judgment. When he finished, she set down her pen. "That's it? Isn't that enough?" "Honestly? No." She leaned back. "Everything you just described is a man experiencing normal grief under impossible circumstances. Victor's team is going to try to paint you as unstable, but what you're describing is human. You think a jury will see it that way?" "I think a jury will see a single father who lost his wife, struggled, and still managed to show up for his daughter and his job. That's sympathetic, not suspicious." Mason wanted to believe her. "What about the drinking? Did you ever drink at work?" "Once. The day before I would have had 2 years sober from when Sarah died. I slipped up the night before, came in still drunk. Derek sent me home." "Anyone else know?" "Just Derek." "Then it doesn't exist unless Derek talks. And Derek won't talk." Sandra made another note. "What about medical help? Therapy? Medication?" "I saw a grief counselor for 6 months. Stopped going because I couldn't afford it, and Sophie needed new shoes." "That's actually good. Shows you tried to get help. The fact that you couldn't afford continued treatment reflects poorly on the company's health insurance, not on you." They spent another 2 hours going through everything. Every mistake, every bad decision, every moment of weakness from the worst year of his life. By the time Sandra let him go, Mason felt scraped raw. He went to his new office, bigger than his old one, with a window and a door that actually closed, and tried to work. The FBI files were due tomorrow. He had security audits to review, new protocols to implement. Instead, he stared at his computer screen and thought about Sophie crying last night, about reporters camped outside their home, about lawyers digging through his grief looking for ammunition. His phone buzzed. Text from Derek. "You okay?" Mason typed back. "No. Want to grab lunch?" "Can't. Too much work." That wasn't really a question. "I'm bringing food to your office in 20 minutes. Derek showed up with barbecue from the place on 6th Street. He kicked the office door closed, spread out the food on Mason's desk, and sat down without waiting for an invitation. "Talk," Derek said. "About what?" "About whatever's making you look like you haven't slept in a week." Mason picked at his brisket. "Victor's lawyers subpoenaed my phone records, my emails, everything." "Yeah, I heard. Legal sent out a company-wide memo telling everyone not to talk to outside attorneys. They're going to find things, bad things." "Like what?" Mason told him about the HR incident, about the grief, about the morning Derek had sent him home drunk. Derek listened, then shrugged. So they're going to use it against me, make me look unstable, unreliable. Mason, you were a mess after Sarah died. Everyone knew it. Everyone understood. Derek leaned forward. And you know what else everyone knew? That you still showed up, still did your job, still took care of your kid. That's not instability. That's strength. That's not how Victor's lawyers will spin it. Who cares how they spin it? The truth is the truth. Derek pushed the food closer. Eat, you're too skinny. Sophie says the same thing. Sophie's a smart kid. They ate in silence for a while. Outside the window, Mason could see the city stretching out below. Thousands of people going about their lives, completely unaware that his was falling apart. "You ever regret it?" Mason asked. "Covering for me that morning?" "No. You could have gotten fired. You're my friend. Friends cover for each other." Derek wadded up his napkin. "Besides, you would have done the same for me." "Yeah, so stop beating yourself up. You made it through the worst thing that can happen to a person. You raised a good kid. You saved a company. You're allowed to have been human during the hard parts." Mason's phone rang. "Evelyn, I need to take this," he told Derek. Derek stood, gathered the trash. "Remember what I said. You're allowed to be human." Mason answered the call. "Yeah?" "The board wants to meet with you," Evelyn said without preamble. "When?" "Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. "What do they want?" "To hear your side before Victor's lawyers poison the well." She paused. "And probably to decide whether you're worth the liability." "Great." "Mason, you need to be prepared. Some of them are still angry about the press conference, about what you said." "I told the truth." "I know, but truth and politics don't always play well together." Evelyn's voice softened. "Just be yourself tomorrow. That's all you can do." After she hung up, Mason sat alone in his office, trying to figure out who himself even was anymore. The exhausted engineer, the grieving widower, the protective father, the accidental hero everyone wanted him to be. He worked until 2:45, then drove to Sophie's school. The reporters had figured out his pickup schedule. They were waiting. "Mr. Reed, how do you respond to allegations that you fabricated evidence?" "Mr. Reed, is it true the company is considering terminating your employment?" "Mr. Reed, how is your daughter handling the media attention?" Mason kept walking, got Sophie into the car, drove away while cameras followed them for 2 blocks before giving up. Sophie was quiet until they were halfway home. Then she said, "Emma's mom says we should do an interview." "What?" "She says if we tell our story, the reporters will leave us alone. She knows someone at a morning show who wants to talk to us." "Absolutely not." "But Dad, Sophie, no. We're not going on TV. We're not telling our story. Our life is private." "It's not private anymore. Everyone already knows about Mom and about you and about everything." Sophie's voice cracked. "At least if we talk, we can tell the truth instead of letting them make stuff up." Mason pulled into their building's parking lot. The reporters were still there, always there, waiting like vultures. "I know this is hard," he said. "I know it's unfair. But the minute we start doing interviews, we're feeding the machine. They'll never leave us alone." "They're not leaving us alone now." She was right. Mason knew she was right. But the idea of putting Sophie on television, of exposing her to that kind of scrutiny, made him want to burn the whole world down. "Let me think about it," he said. "That's what you always say when you mean no." Sophie Tropo, "I'm not a baby, Dad. I'm 8. I can handle this." She grabbed her backpack. "But you have to let me help. You can't protect me from everything." She got out of the car and walked toward the building, ignoring the reporters shouting questions. Mason followed, watching his daughter navigate a situation no child should have to face. Inside the apartment, Sophie went straight to her room. Mason stood in the kitchen, pulled out his phone, and called Sandra. "Is it a terrible idea to do a TV interview?" he asked. "Yes, absolutely. Don't even think about it." "What if it gets them to leave us alone?" "It won't. It'll make things worse. They'll analyze every word, every expression, every moment. They'll dig deeper into your lives because you gave them permission." Sandra's voice was firm. "Trust me on this. No interviews." "Okay. Are you actually going to listen to me this time?" "Probably." Sandra sighed. "Good enough. I'll see you tomorrow before the board meeting. We need to prepare." That night, Mason made spaghetti. Sophie picked at hers, still angry. They didn't talk much. After dinner, she did homework while Mason tried to review the security protocols he was supposed to present to the board tomorrow. The words blurred together. He couldn't focus, couldn't stop thinking about Sophie's face in the car, about her saying she could handle this. She shouldn't have to handle this. She was 8. At 9 o'clock, Mason went to tuck her in. She was already under the covers, hugging her elephant. "Still mad at me?" he asked. "A little." "That's fair." Mason sat on the edge of her bed. "I'm sorry this is happening. All of it. You deserve better." "It's not your fault." "It kind of is. If I hadn't gone back to work, then a lot of people would have lost their money. Kids like me whose parents needed their paychecks." Sophie looked at him. "You did the right thing. It just sucks that doing the right thing is so hard. When did you get so wise?" "I have a good teacher." She smiled slightly, echoing what she'd said before. Mason kissed her forehead. "Love you, kiddo." "Love you too, even when you're overprotective." "Especially when I'm overprotective." Mason left her door cracked and went back to the living room. His phone showed 43 unread messages. He ignored them all, opened his laptop, and started preparing for tomorrow's board meeting. He worked until past midnight, building a presentation about security improvements, budget requirements, staffing needs, everything the company needed to prevent another victor from destroying them from the inside. When he finally went to bed, he dreamed about Sarah. She was sitting in their old apartment, the one before Sophie was born, laughing at something he'd said. Then she turned serious. "You can't protect her from everything," she said. "I have to try." "You'll crush her if you try too hard. Let her breathe." Mason woke up at 4 a.m. with tears on his face. He got up, made coffee, and watched the sun rise through the kitchen window. The city was quiet this early, peaceful. By the time Sophie woke up, Mason had already been to the gym, showered, and made actual breakfast. Eggs, toast, fruit that wasn't browning. "Who are you, and what did you do with my dad?" Sophie asked. "Your dad's trying. How's that working out?" "The eggs are a little rubbery, but I appreciate the effort." They ate together. Sophie told him about a project at school, about Emma's birthday party next week, about normal 8-year-old things. For 20 minutes, life felt almost regular. Then they walked outside to find twice as many reporters as yesterday. "Mr. Reed, Victor Hale's lawyer claims you have a history of mental instability." "Mr. Reed, is it true you were investigated for workplace misconduct?" "Mr. Reed, how do you respond to allegations that you're an unfit parent?" That last one stopped him cold. Sophie's hand tightened in his. "What did you say?" Mason's voice came out dangerous. The reporter, a young woman with too much makeup and not enough sense, stepped closer. "Sources say your daughter has been left alone frequently while you work excessive hours. Child Services has been contacted." "That's a lie." "Is it? How many nights has your daughter spent with neighbors while you worked?" Mason felt something snap inside him. "My daughter has never been neglected. She's cared for by trusted friends when I have to work, which is what responsible single parents do. And if you or anyone else suggests otherwise again, I will sue you for defamation so hard your grandchildren will be paying for it." He got Sophie into the car, hands shaking with rage. Sophie was pale, scared. "Dad, is that true? About Child Services?" "No, they're trying to get a reaction, that's all." Mason started the car. Don't listen to them. But he called Sandra the minute he dropped Sophie at school. Did you hear what they're saying about child services? I heard. It's baseless. Victor's team is getting desperate. If they actually call child services, they won't find anything. You're a good father. Your daughter is healthy, happy, well cared for. Sandra paused. But this is exactly why I said no interviews. They're escalating, trying to provoke you into doing something stupid. It's working. I know. Which is why you need to stay calm today. The board meeting is in 6 hours. Focus on that. Mason tried. He went to headquarters, reviewed his presentation 12 times, met with Sandra to practice potential questions. She grilled him for an hour, playing devil's advocate, asking the hardest questions the board might throw at him. By the time 3 o'clock arrived, Mason felt as prepared as he was going to get. The boardroom was already full when he arrived. The same faces from last time, plus a few new ones. Lawyers, probably. Everyone looked grim. Evelyn stood when Mason entered. Thank you all for coming. Mason has prepared a presentation about security improvements going forward. Mason set up his laptop, pulled up his slides, started talking about vulnerability assessments, access controls, monitoring systems. The technical stuff he actually understood. 10 minutes in, the silver-haired woman interrupted. This is all very interesting, Mr. Reed, but what we really want to know is whether you're a liability. Mason stopped. Excuse me? Victor Hale's defense team is preparing to paint you as an unstable employee with a history of erratic behavior. They're going to argue that you fabricated evidence to frame him, motivated by personal grievances against management. She leaned forward. Is there any truth to that? No. You never had conflicts with management? I had conflicts. I disagreed with decisions. I pushed back when I thought something was wrong. That's not instability. That's doing my job. What about your wife's death? We've heard you had difficulties after that. Mason felt every eye in the room on him. My wife died of cancer 4 years ago. I struggled, I got help, I kept working, I raised my daughter. What exactly is the question here? The question, said one of the men Mason didn't recognize, is whether this company can afford to keep you employed while you're at the center of a media firestorm and a criminal trial. So you're considering firing me again, Evelyn spoke up. Nobody's making that decision today. We're just assessing the situation. The situation is that I saved this company. I exposed corporate sabotage. I'm cooperating with federal investigators. And now you're wondering if I'm worth the trouble. Mason closed his laptop. You want to know if I'm a liability? Fine. I probably am. Keeping me means dealing with reporters and lawyers and bad publicity. Firing me means you look weak and vindictive, but at least you don't have to deal with the mess. Mr. Reed, but here's the thing you should consider. Mason stood. I'm not the only person in this company who knows where the bodies are buried. I'm not the only one who's been documenting problems, fighting for changes, pushing back against policies that put profit over people. I'm just the one who got unlucky enough to become visible. The room was silent. You fire me, fine, but you'll still have all the same problems. You'll still have overworked engineers making mistakes because they're exhausted. You'll still have a culture that rewards silence and punishes truth-telling. You'll still be vulnerable to the next Victor who decides to burn everything down. Mason grabbed his laptop. So yeah, I'm a liability, but I'm a liability who actually cares about fixing things. Your call. He walked out before anyone could respond. In the hallway, his hands were shaking. He'd just potentially ended his career, blown up the best job he'd ever had, guaranteed that Sophie would hear about her father's dramatic exit on the evening news. His phone buzzed, text from Evelyn. That was either brilliant or career suicide, possibly both. Then another text. Stay close. Board is deliberating. Mason went to his office, closed the door, and waited. 20 minutes, 40, an hour. Finally, Patricia called. The board would like to see you again. Mason walked back to the boardroom on legs that felt unsteady. The same faces, the same grim expressions, but something had shifted in the room. The silver-haired woman spoke first. Mr. Reed, you're absolutely right. This company has serious cultural problems. Problems that contributed to Victor's ability to sabotage us from the inside. Mason waited, which is why we're approving a complete security overhaul. You'll have the budget and authority to implement whatever changes you deem necessary. She glanced at Evelyn. With CEO approval, of course. We're also creating a new employee advocacy position, another board member added. Someone who reports directly to this board about working conditions, complaints, and systemic issues. We want you to help design that role. Mason looked around the room. So I'm not fired? You're not fired. You're probably going to wish you were fired when you see how much work this is going to be. The woman almost smiled. But we need people who care enough to fight. Apparently you're one of them. What about the media, the trial? Company legal will coordinate with you. PR will run interference. We can't make it go away, but we can make it manageable. Evelyn stood. You're stuck with us, Mason. Unless you want to quit. Mason thought about Sophie, about the reporters outside their building, about Victor's lawyers digging through his grief, about all the reasons he should walk away. Then he thought about the engineers working themselves to death, about the culture that needed changing, about actually being able to make things better. I'm not quitting, he said. The board meeting ended with handshakes and promises. Mason left feeling like he'd won something, though he wasn't entirely sure what. Derek was waiting by Mason's office. Well, I kept my job, I think. Maybe got promoted. It's unclear. That's the most Mason answer I've ever heard. They went to Derek's office to debrief. Mason explained about the security overhaul, the advocacy position, the board's sudden interest in actually fixing things. You shamed them into it, Derek said. Nice work. I didn't mean to. That's what makes it effective. Mason's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Mr. Reed, this is Agent Torres. We've got something you need to see. Torres was at headquarters in 30 minutes with Agent Kim and a laptop full of evidence that made Mason's stomach turn. Victor hadn't been working alone. The investors backing him included a former board member who'd been forced out 3 years ago, a tech CEO with a history of hostile takeovers, and someone currently employed at the company. Who? Mason asked. Torres pulled up an access log. The name at the top made Mason's blood run cold. Jennifer Walsh, VP of Finance, someone he'd worked with for 6 years, someone he'd trusted. She provided Victor with financial data, Torres explained, helped him identify the best time to strike for maximum damage. She was supposed to get a payout when the company was sold. Does Evelyn know? Mason asked. We're telling her now. We'll need your help with the technical analysis. Jennifer covered her tracks well, but not well enough. Mason spent the next 4 hours going through financial records with the FBI. Jennifer had been careful, but Victor had kept logs of their communications. Proof of conspiracy. Proof of betrayal. When Torres finally released him, it was past 8. Sophie would be with Mrs. Chen, worried. Mason called to check in. She's fine, Mrs. Chen said. We made dumplings. She's teaching me about Minecraft, whatever that is. I'll be there soon, thank you. Mason, the reporters are still outside, many reporters. I know. Maybe you should use the back entrance, through the parking garage? It was a good idea. Mason took the long way home, came up through the garage, and made it to the apartment without being seen. Sophie ran to him when he opened the door. Dad, Mrs. Chen says you might be on TV again. Maybe, probably. Mason hugged her. How was your day? Better than yours, I think. Mrs. Chen gathered her things. She did her homework. We had a good dinner. She is a wonderful child. I know. Thank you for taking care of her. After Mrs. Chen left, Mason and Sophie sat on the couch. He told her about the board meeting, about keeping his job, about the changes that were coming. He didn't tell her about Jennifer. That was too much for tonight. So things are getting better? Sophie asked. Some things. Others are still complicated. When will they stop being complicated? I don't know, kiddo. Maybe never. Mason pulled her close. But we'll figure it out together. Sophie fell asleep against his shoulder halfway through a movie. Mason carried her to bed, tucked her in, and stood in her doorway watching her breathe. His daughter. His whole world. The reason he kept fighting even when everything felt impossible. His phone buzzed. Text from Evelyn. Jennifer's been arrested. Press is going to have a field day. Prepare Sophie. Mason closed his eyes. Another day. Another crisis. Another round of questions and cameras and scrutiny. But Sophie was safe. They had a home. He had a job. They'd survived worse. They'd survived this too. Jennifer Walsh's arrest made national news by morning. Mason saw it on his phone before he even got out of bed. The headlines were everywhere, each one more dramatic than the last. The company's VP of Finance led away in handcuffs. Another conspirator in the plot to destroy a billion-dollar company. The web of betrayal growing wider. His phone started ringing at 6:15 a.m. He ignored it, made coffee, stared at Sophie's drawing on the refrigerator, stick figures holding hands under a sun, and tried to find the energy to face another day of this. Sophie appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school. "It's bad again, isn't it?" "Yeah." "Worse than yesterday?" "About the same, different details." Mason poured cereal into 2 bowls. "You ready for more reporters?" "Do I have a choice?" "Not really." They ate breakfast in silence. Mason kept checking his phone. Messages from Derek, from Sandra, from people he barely knew offering sympathy or advice, or just wanting to be part of the story. Nothing from the one person he actually wanted to hear from. At 7:30, Evelyn called. "How bad is it outside your place?" she asked. Mason looked out the window. "Worse than yesterday. I count 5 vans. There's 7 outside headquarters. The board wants to make a statement this afternoon. They want you there." "No." "Mason, I'm done with press conferences, done with statements. I did my part. Let someone else deal with the cameras." Mason carried his coffee to the couch, suddenly exhausted despite having just woken up. "I have a daughter to raise and a job to do. That's it." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I'll handle it." "Just like that?" "You were right before. About all of it. The company asking too much, taking people for granted, expecting everyone to sacrifice everything." Her voice softened. "I'm still learning what good leadership looks like. Apparently it includes knowing when to stop pushing." After they hung up, Sophie came and sat next to him. "You okay?" "Tired." "You're always tired lately." "Yeah." Mason put an arm around her. "I know. Mrs. Chen says you need a vacation." "Mrs. Chen says a lot of things. She's usually right, though." Sophie leaned against him. "When this is all over, can we go somewhere? Just us?" "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know. Somewhere with no reporters, no phones, no people asking questions." "So the moon?" Sophie giggled. "Maybe just the beach." "The beach sounds good." Mason kissed the top of her head. "When this is over, we'll go to the beach. Promise." Getting Sophie to school required the parking garage maneuver again. Mason dropped her at the side entrance, watched her run inside, and sat in his car for 5 minutes just breathing. His phone showed 32 missed calls. He turned it off completely. At headquarters, he took the service elevator to avoid the lobby. His office felt like a sanctuary. He closed the door, pulled the blinds, and tried to focus on actual work. The security overhaul, the protocols he was supposed to be implementing, the job that was supposed to matter. But his mind kept drifting to Jennifer. 6 years working together. 6 years of meetings and projects and casual conversations. She'd brought cookies when Sarah died, had asked about Sophie, had seemed genuinely kind, and she'd been planning to destroy everything the whole time. A knock on his door interrupted his spiral. Derek, carrying 2 coffees and looking concerned. "You turned off your phone," Derek said, handing over one of the cups. "I needed the quiet." "Fair. But you missed Sandra calling an emergency meeting. Jennifer's lawyer is already spinning the narrative, claiming she was coerced by Victor, that she was afraid for her safety. That's bullshit, obviously, but it's the story they're selling." Derek sat down. "The FBI wants to interview you again, about your interactions with Jennifer. Anything she might have said that seemed off." Mason thought back through 6 years of interactions. She was always careful, never said anything suspicious, never acted guilty. That's what made her good at it. Derek set down his coffee. "Look, I know you're exhausted. I know you want this to be over, but we're in the final stretch. Victor's trial starts in 3 weeks. Jennifer's probably going to plead out. Once that happens, the reporters will find a new story." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, what's the point?" Mason's office phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again. Derek answered it, listened, then handed it to Mason. "It's Evelyn. She says it's important." Mason took the phone. "What?" "Victor's lawyer wants to meet. Off the record. No FBI, no prosecutors. Just you, me, and them. Why? He says Victor wants to talk. Directly. Evelyn paused. I think he's trying to flip on his co-conspirators, including the board member who funded this. When? Today, 3 o'clock. My office. Mason should have said no, should have told Evelyn to handle it herself, should have remembered that he was just an engineer, not a negotiator or a lawyer, or anyone qualified to sit across from the man who'd tried to destroy everything. But he wanted to hear it, wanted to hear Victor admit what he'd done, wanted to look him in the eye and see if there was any remorse there at all. I'll be there, Mason said. The hours until 3 o'clock crawled by. Mason tried to work, gave up, and ended up in the operations center watching his team run diagnostics on the new security systems. They were good people, competent, dedicated. The kind of engineers who cared about doing things right. The kind Victor had been willing to hurt for his own ambition. At 2:45, Mason headed to Evelyn's office. Sandra was already there, along with 2 lawyers Mason didn't recognize. They'd arranged the chairs carefully. Power dynamics, probably. Psychology. Victor's lawyer arrived at exactly 3 o'clock. Marcus Webb, according to the business card he distributed like he was networking at a cocktail party. Mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Webb said. My client is very interested in resolving this situation with minimal damage to all parties. Your client tried to destroy a company and hurt millions of people, Mason said. There's no minimal damage here. My client made mistakes. Poor judgment. But he's prepared to cooperate fully with federal investigators in exchange for certain considerations. Evelyn leaned forward. What kind of cooperation? Names, bank records, communications with his co-conspirators, everything needed to build cases against the people who funded and encouraged this attack. Webb pulled out a tablet, including former board member Richard Castellano, who provided initial funding. CEO Thomas Merritt of Nexus Technologies, who stood to acquire your company at reduced value. And others. In exchange for what? Sandra asked. Reduced charges. A plea agreement that keeps my client out of prison. Webb looked at Mason. And a statement from Mr. Reed acknowledging that my client's actions, while misguided, were motivated by genuine concern for the company's direction. Mason laughed. It came out harsh. You want me to say Victor sabotaged the company because he cared about it? I want you to say that my client's methods were wrong, but his intentions were complex. That's all. No. Mr. Reed, Victor didn't care about this company. He cared about power, control, getting what he thought he deserved. Mason stood. He was willing to freeze nearly $1 billion in transactions, to leave families without paychecks, to destroy thousands of jobs, because he was angry about not getting promoted. That's an oversimplification. That's the truth. Mason looked at Evelyn. Are we actually considering this? The FBI wants the co-conspirators, Evelyn said quietly. Castellano has been poisoning board decisions for years. Merritt has tried to acquire us twice before. If Victor can help build cases against them, then Victor gets away with what he did. Victor will still face consequences, just not prison, Sandra spoke up. And in exchange, we get justice for everyone else involved. Mason wanted to argue, wanted to say that justice meant Victor paying fully for what he'd done. But he looked at the lawyers, at their practical expressions, at the calculations happening behind their eyes. This was how the world worked. The powerful negotiated. The connected got deals. And people like him were expected to accept it because at least some justice was better than none. I need to think about it, Mason said. We need an answer by tomorrow, Webb said. The prosecution is preparing to take this to trial. If my client cooperates, they'll want to move quickly. After Webb left, Mason sat in Evelyn's office feeling sick. I know this isn't what you wanted, Evelyn said. What I wanted was for Victor to face actual consequences. For people to see that you can't just hurt innocent people and walk away because you have good lawyers. He's not walking away. He'll lose his career, his reputation. He'll be a convicted felon. But he won't go to prison. He won't lose years of his life like the families he hurt lost their sense of security, like I lost sleep and peace and privacy. Mason rubbed his face. It's not fair. No, it's not. Evelyn sat down across from him. But if we don't take this deal, Victor fights. The trial drags on for months. Your life stays under a microscope.
Sophie keeps dealing with reporters, and at the end of it all, Victor might still get a plea deal, just a worse one that doesn't give us the co-conspirators. So I'm supposed to compromise. You're supposed to decide what you can live with. Evelyn met his eyes. I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your call.
Mason left without deciding, drove to Sophie's school early, sat in the pickup line, and watched kids playing on the playground. Their lives were simple, complicated only by homework and friendship drama and which game to play at recess. Sophie had lost that simplicity. Because of Victor, because of the attack, because her father had chosen to be a good man in a world that punished good men. When Sophie climbed into the car, she took one look at his face and asked, "What happened now?" Mason told her. About Victor's deal, about the choice he had to make, about justice versus pragmatism, and how they rarely aligned. Sophie listened quietly. When he finished, she said, "What does your heart say?" "My heart says Victor should go to prison." "And your head?" "My head says taking the deal helps more people, gets the others involved, ends this faster. So listen to your head." "But what about justice?" Sophie buckled her seat bag. "Dad, you taught me that doing the right thing isn't always about getting what you want. Sometimes it's about doing what helps the most people, even when it sucks." "When did I teach you that?" "When you went back to work, when you saved all those families even though you were mad at the company. You did what helped people, not what felt good." She looked at him with those two wise 8-year-old eyes. This is the same thing. Mason drove home slowly, thinking about what Sophie had said, about doing what helped people instead of what felt good, about being the kind of person who made hard choices because they were right, not because they were satisfying. That night, he called Sandra and told her he'd sign the statement, not because he believed Victor's intentions were complex, not because he thought the deal was fair, but because it would help nail the people who'd funded this nightmare, and because it would let him and Sophie start rebuilding their lives. "You're making the right choice," Sandra said. "I'm making a choice. Not sure it's the right one." In law, those are often the same thing. The next week was a blur of depositions and statements and meetings with federal prosecutors. Victor cooperated fully, providing evidence that built cases against Castellano, Merritt, and 3 other investors who'd bankrolled the sabotage. Jennifer took a plea deal too, agreeing to testify in exchange for reduced charges. The media coverage was intense. Every new revelation brought fresh cameras, fresh questions, fresh speculation about what it all meant. But something had shifted. The reporters outside Mason's building started to thin out. A few at first, then more. Within 10 days, the news vans were gone. Other stories were breaking. Political scandals, natural disasters, the endless churn of the news cycle moving on to fresh meat. Mason kept his head down and focused on work. The security overhaul was massive. New protocols, new hiring, complete restructuring of who had access to what. He worked reasonable hours, left at 3 to pick up Sophie, and only checked his email sporadically in the evenings. It felt revolutionary. 3 weeks after Jennifer's arrest, Derek stopped by Mason's office with news. Victor pled guilty this morning, sentencing in 2 months. He'll get probation, community service, and a permanent record. That's it? That's it. But Castellano was arrested yesterday. Merritt's under investigation. The FBI is building cases against everyone involved. Derek sat down. It's not perfect, but it's something. Yeah. Mason stared at his computer screen. It's something. You okay?
I don't know. I thought I'd feel better when it was over, but it just feels empty. That's normal. You've been running on adrenaline and anger for a month. Now there's nothing to fight. So what do I do? Derek shrugged. Live your life. Be a dad. Do your job. Figure out what normal looks like now.
Normal turned out to be harder than Mason expected. He kept waiting for another crisis, another disaster, another reason to work himself to exhaustion. When it didn't come, he didn't know what to do with the quiet. Sophie noticed. Of course she did. You seem weird, she said one night over dinner. Weird how? Like you're waiting for something bad to happen. I'm just adjusting. To what? To things being okay. Mason pushed food around his plate. I'm not used to okay. Sophie considered this. Maybe you should talk to someone, like a therapist. Maybe. Mrs. Chen has a therapist. She says everyone should have one, that it's like going to the doctor but for your brain. Mrs. Chen is very wise. So you'll do it? Mason looked at his daughter, at her hopeful face, at the kid who'd handled more in the past month than most adults handled in years. Yeah, I'll do it. He found a therapist who specialized in grief and trauma. Dr. Sarah Lin, the coincidence of the first name wasn't lost on him, who had an office downtown in a calm manner that made it easier to talk about the things Mason had been avoiding for 4 years. They talked about Sarah's death, about the guilt of moving on, about the drinking and the dark days, and the fear that he'd fail Sophie the way he felt he'd failed his wife. You didn't fail Sarah, Dr. Lin said during their third session. She had cancer. You couldn't save her. I should have done more. You did everything you could. And when she died, you did something even harder. You kept living, for Sophie. That's not failure. Mason wanted to believe her. Some days he almost did. Work continued to change. Evelyn had taken Mason's boardroom speech seriously. The company hired the employee advocate Mason had helped design. A woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to his neighbor, though Mason found the coincidence amusing, who reported directly to the board about systemic issues. Within 2 months, she'd identified 17 policy changes that needed to happen. Better parental leave, mental health support, mandatory vacation time, limits on overtime, all the things that might have prevented someone like Mason from burning out in the first place. The board approved most of them, pushed back on a few. But the conversation was happening, which was more than Mason had expected. In late August, 6 weeks after Victor's plea deal, Evelyn called Mason into her office. He went expecting another crisis. Instead, he found her standing by her window with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. It's 2 in the afternoon, Mason said. It's also the anniversary of the day I fired you. Seems worth marking. She poured 2 fingers into each glass, handed one to Mason. 2 mistakes. 2 mistakes, Mason echoed, and drank. They stood by the window, looking out at the city. The same view Mason had seen from this office a dozen times now. Still impressive, still dizzying. I've been thinking, Evelyn said, about what you said, about this company's problems. Which time? I've said a lot. All of them, but specifically about leadership, about listening instead of assuming. She turned to face him. I'm creating a new position, Chief People Officer. Someone whose entire job is making sure we don't forget that employees are human beings with lives and needs and limits. Sounds expensive. Sounds necessary. Evelyn refilled her glass. I want you to help me find the right person, someone who won't let me get complacent again. I can do that. I also want to thank you for not quitting, for staying even when I gave you every reason to walk away. Mason thought about all the times he'd almost left, all the moments when it would have been easier to just give up. Sophie wouldn't let me quit. She said people needed me. She was right. She usually is. They finished the whiskey in comfortable silence. Then Evelyn asked the question Mason had been dreading. What's next for you? Long term? Honestly, I have no idea. Mason set down his glass. 6 months ago, I was just trying to survive each day. Now I'm supposed to have plans and goals and a future. It's overwhelming. You don't have to have it all figured out. Everyone keeps saying that, but I feel like I should. Like after everything that happened, I should know what I want. What do you want? Mason thought about it, really thought about it. I want Sophie to have a normal childhood. I want to do work that matters. I want to sleep through the night without waiting for the next crisis. He paused. And I want to stop feeling like I'm failing at all of it. You're not failing. Some days it feels like I am. That's being human, Mason, not failing. Evelyn walked back to her desk. Take some time off. Real time. Not working from home time. Take Sophie somewhere. Rediscover what normal feels like. I promised her the beach. Then go to the beach. Mason left her office with the surprising realization that he actually could take time off. That the company wouldn't collapse without him. That Sophie deserved a father who wasn't constantly exhausted or distracted or waiting for disaster. He told Sophie that night over ice cream at their usual place. Her face lit up. Really? We're really going? Really? 2 weeks. Just us. No work. No phones. No reporters. Sophie launched herself at him, nearly knocking over both their ice cream cups. When? Next month, September, after school starts but before it gets cold. They spent the next 3 weeks planning. Sophie researched beaches, made lists of things they needed, drew pictures of what she imagined the ocean would look like. Her excitement was infectious. Mason found himself actually looking forward to it instead of dreading all the work he'd miss. The night before they left, Mrs. Chen came over with cookies and advice. "You're a good father," she said, pressing the cookie tin into Mason's hands. "Don't forget that. Some days I don't feel like a good father. Some days you're tired. That's different." She patted his cheek. "Your daughter is happy, healthy. She knows she's loved. That's what matters." The beach was everything Sophie had hoped for. A small rental house right on the sand. No internet, no TV, just waves and sun, and the simple pleasure of having nowhere to be. They built sandcastles, collected shells. Sophie learned to body surf while Mason watched from the shore, heart in his throat every time a wave took her under. But she always came up laughing, fearless in a way that reminded him so much of Sarah it hurt. On the 4th night, they sat on the beach watching the sunset. Sophie was quiet, which usually meant she was thinking hard about something. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Mason pulled her closer. "I think she'd be proud of you. You're brave and smart and kind. Everything she wanted you to be." "What about you?" "I'm working on it." That's not an answer. Mason looked out at the ocean, at the endless water stretching to a horizon he couldn't see. "I think your mom would understand that I'm trying my best, and that my best isn't always perfect, but it's honest. Is that enough?" "Some days I think it has to be." Sophie leaned against him. "I think it's enough. I think you're enough." Mason felt something tight in his chest finally loosen, something he'd been carrying since Sarah died, since the attack, since everything fell apart and came back together wrong. Maybe he wasn't failing, maybe he was just human, making mistakes, trying to do better. Learning that strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about getting back up even when staying down felt easier. They stayed at the beach for the full 2 weeks. Mason slept better than he had in years, ate actual meals, played with his daughter without constantly checking his phone, remembered what it felt like to just exist without crisis or deadline or disaster looming. On their last day, Sophie wanted to collect one final batch of shells. She ran ahead on the beach, pigtails flying, completely absorbed in her search. Mason watched her and felt something close to peace. His phone buzzed. He'd turned it on that morning, preparing for the return to reality. A text from Derek. "Hope you're having a good time. Don't rush back. Everything's fine here." Then one from Evelyn. "Board approved the new mental health initiatives. You were right about what people needed." And finally, one from Dr. Lin. "Remember, healing isn't linear. Some days will be harder than others. That's normal." Sophie ran back with her hands full of shells. "Look, this one's perfect." Mason looked at the shell she was holding. It was cracked along one side, worn smooth by the ocean. Not perfect at all, but beautiful in its own way. Complete despite being broken. "Yeah," he said, "it is." They drove home the next day, back to the city and the apartment and the life they'd built together. The reporters were gone. The news cycle had moved on. Victor was serving his community service. Castellano was awaiting trial. The company was implementing changes. Life was slowly, imperfectly, getting better. That first Thursday back, Mason picked Sophie up from school at exactly 3:15. They went to the ice cream place on 5th Street, their usual spot. Sophie got cookie dough. Mason got coffee because some things didn't change. "This is nice," Sophie said, swinging her legs from the metal chair. "Just normal." "Yeah, it is." "Think it'll stay this way?" Mason thought about Victor's lawyers, about the trial still coming, about all the ways things could go wrong again. But he also thought about Dr. Lin's office, about Evelyn's changes, about the security systems he'd built to prevent another attack, about Sophie's smile and Mrs. Chen's cookies and Derek's friendship. "I think it'll be different," he said honestly. "Not perfect, but better than it was." "Good enough?" "Yeah, kiddo, good enough." They sat in the afternoon sun eating ice cream and watching people walk by. Normal people living normal lives. And for the first time in longer than Mason could remember, he felt like one of them. Not a hero, not a victim, not a tragedy or a headline or a story, just a father and his daughter. Surviving, healing, learning that strength wasn't about being perfect or fearless or having all the answers. It was about showing up, trying, admitting when you were wrong, accepting help when you needed it, and understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was just keep living, even when it hurt. 3 months later, on a crisp November evening, Mason attended a company event he couldn't avoid. A celebration of the security improvements, recognition for the team's work, the kind of corporate gathering he usually hated. But Sophie had insisted he go, had helped him pick out a tie, had told him he needed to accept that people genuinely appreciated what he'd done. The event was at a hotel downtown. Too many people, too much small talk. But Evelyn's speech was good. She talked about learning from failure, about listening to the people who actually did the work, about building a company culture that valued honesty over hierarchy. She called Mason up to receive an award, some crystal thing that would probably gather dust on his desk. The room applauded. Mason said a few words about teamwork and second chances and the engineers who made everything work.
When he returned to his seat, Derek leaned over. That wasn't so bad, was it? It was tolerable. High praise from you. After the ceremony, people wanted to talk to Mason, thank him, tell him their stories. A woman whose daughter's college fund had been in one of the frozen accounts, a man whose mortgage payment had nearly bounced, a young engineer who said Mason's stand at the board meeting had inspired him to speak up about a safety issue. By the time Mason escaped, it was nearly 9. He drove home through empty streets, tired but not unhappy. The apartment was dark when he arrived. Mrs. Chen had already brought Sophie home and put her to bed. Mason checked on her. Sophie was asleep with her elephant, face peaceful. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, just watching her breathe. His daughter, his reason for everything. "I'm trying, kiddo," he whispered. "I'm really trying." In the living room, he found a note from Sophie on the coffee table. It was a drawing, stick figures again, but more detailed this time. A man and a girl on a beach, waves and shells, and a sun. At the bottom, in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, "We're going to be okay. Love, Sophie." Mason put the drawing on the refrigerator next to all the others. Then he made himself tea, sat on the couch, and allowed himself to believe it. They were going to be okay. Not perfect, not healed, not free from problems or pain or the complicated mess of being human, but okay. Together, surviving, learning to live with their scars instead of hiding them. And maybe that was the real lesson, that heroes weren't people who saved the day without breaking. They were people who broke and kept going anyway, who made mistakes and admitted them, who fell down and got back up, who understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was doing what needed to be done despite being terrified. Mason had spent weeks working himself to exhaustion to protect people he'd never met, had been fired for it, had been vindicated, had become famous against his will, had watched his privacy evaporate and his daughter learn hard truths about the world too young. And through it all, he'd just been trying to do what was right. Not what was easy, not what looked good. Just right. Sometimes that was enough. Most times, actually, it had to be. Because life didn't offer perfect endings. It offered imperfect continuations, moments of grace amid the chaos, small victories that added up to something that might, on good days, look like happiness. Mason finished his tea and went to bed. Tomorrow he'd wake up early, make breakfast,